Tonight, we begin by drifting into a quiet corner of the world, a place where maps soften at the edges and the ocean breathes with a slow, ancient rhythm. You don't need to do anything right now. Just let your shoulders loosen a little. Let your jaw unclench and let the soft hush of imagined waves settle around you. This is the beginning of a long, gentle journey into forgotten islands and remote places on Earth. Places so quiet that even time seems to move differently there. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a small wooden pier, the kind built before anyone bothered naming things. The boards are old but warm beneath your feet, and the air carries the faint scent of salt and moss. Somewhere far away, gulls cry, softly, like memories trying not to disturb your rest. The sea is calm, almost impossibly calm, as if it has been waiting for you. A slow breeze brushes past you, carrying with it the distant hum of places untouched, places the modern world has gently forgotten. As you breathe, the world around you begins to dim, not darker, but softer, as though someone has turned down the brightness of reality. Colors become muted pastels, movement slow. Even your thoughts begin to stretch, becoming longer, more fluid, like tides pulling toward the horizon. You are safe here. Nothing rushes, nothing demands. Everything simply drifts at the pace of your breathing. We start our journey with quiet steps. You lift your gaze from the pier and notice how the sky above is blanketed by thin clouds, moving lazily like wandering spirits tracing old maritime paths. The sun hangs low, warm and gentle, spilling gold over the water. In this light, the ocean looks like an old story, ancient, unhurried, patient. This is the dreamlike intro, a soft threshold between your waking day and a slow descent into the realm of forgotten shores. Now, let yourself drift. The waves tap softly against the pier, like fingers brushing a drum made of water. Each tap seems to remind you that the world is vast and filled with corners no one notices anymore. Some places remain untouched not because they are unreachable, but because humanity has simply moved on, leaving behind quiet sanctuaries where silence grows wild like vines. You take a few steps forward. Wooden boards creak, but they do so kindly. Ahead of you, anchored gently by a single rope, is a small boat, the kind carved from a single trunk of wood, the kind that looks like it belongs to no era at all. It rocks with the rhythm of your breath, inviting, never insisting. You step into it, feeling it cradle your weight as though it has carried travelers like you for centuries. And as you settle into the smooth wooden curve, the world begins to shift into the dream gate. You are crossing into a softer realm. The fog arrives first. Not thick, not cold, just a light veil sliding across the water. It moves like a curtain being drawn. In it, distant shapes blur. The horizon softens, the sea blends into the sky, and your sense of direction melts away. Yet nothing feels uncertain. Instead, the loss of detail feels freeing, as though the world is simplifying itself so your mind can rest. Somewhere behind you, the faint glow of a lighthouse turns slowly. Its light sweeps over the water in calm circles, more rhythm and illumination. It doesn't guide you anywhere. It simply exists, like a heartbeat at the edge of the sea. You watch its glow for a moment, noticing how it fades through the fog, then returns, then fades again. It feels like the world reminding you to breathe. The boat begins to drift, not pushed by oars, not pulled by wind, just carried by a gentle current you didn't notice before. Your hands rest loosely on your lap. Your eyes soften as you look ahead. The fog parts in slow ribbons, opening pathways through the pale gray. You feel yourself slipping deeper, thought by thought, into this soft world. An old map lies beside you in the boat. Its parchment is creased, corners curled. The ink is faded in some places and fresh in others, as though the map has been rewritten by countless dreamers. You trace a finger along one of the islands drawn there. The coastline loops and twists like a memory half recalled. No labels, no borders, just shapes. Islands waiting for attention, islands waiting for you. The boat continues to glide forward, and you hear the faintest sound of waves touching a distant, unseen shore. Slow, gentle, rhythmic. The sound feels like a lullaby. The fog grows lighter and thinner as you move, and soon the outline of the first forgotten island begins to emerge, small at first, almost shy. A rise of stone and green rising from the sea, untouched by noise, wrapped in soft stillness. But we're not at the first fact yet. No rush. The journey begins with atmosphere, not details, with breath, not knowledge. Let the world slow even more. Listen. A shift in the air, the soft splash of water against an unseen reef, the distant call of a bird you don't recognize. All of it blends into a quiet gateway that guides you deeper into this long, dreamy exploration. As you drift, you notice how your breath naturally matches the motion of the water. Inhale as the boat lifts, exhale as it lowers. The world feels rhythmic, predictable, safe. The fog around you now glows faintly with the hidden sun, turning everything into shades of pale gold and soft silver. You feel suspended between worlds, the one you came from and the one you're drifting toward. And slowly, very slowly, the first forgotten island rises fully into view. This is where the soft facts will begin, but not yet. In this first part, we prepare the heart, the breath, the senses. For now, you simply drift closer. Closer to the quiet edges of Earth. Closer to the soft stories waiting along its forgotten shores. Closer to the calm you've been searching for. Breathe and drift onward. As the boat glides nearer, a sense of gentle anticipation settles in your chest. Not excitement, but something softer, like the feeling of standing at the doorway of a long-forgotten memory. The island ahead seems to breathe with its own rhythm, shaped by wrens older than stories. You sense that whatever waits there will speak in whispers, not declarations. And in this calm drifting, you realize the journey has already begun inside you, as quietly as dawn. The air over the water settles into a steady hush as the shoreline of that forgotten island grows clearer, its quiet edges revealing themselves not with drama, but with a kind of patient truth. The surface of the sea becomes glassy for a moment, as though even the waves prefer to hold their breath in presence of a place that has gone so long without witnesses. Faint outlines of old volcanic ridges rise behind the tree line, softened by moss and time, giving the impression that the land itself once held great heat but has cooled into a slow, contemplative stillness. There is no urgency here. Every detail asks to be noticed gently. As the boat drifts closer, the scent of salt shifts into something earthier. Damp leaves, old bark, a trace of wild orchids carried by the breeze. The island has that unmistakable feeling of being untouched, not just physically but emotionally, as though no one has hurried across its soil in centuries. Even the birds seem to call in softer tones, weaving sound into the quiet rather than breaking it. You observe the way the coastal rocks form natural pathways underwater, like ancient steps carved by tides rather than hands. It becomes clear that this place was shaped patiently, gradually, and with no desire to impress anyone who might arrive. When your foot finally presses onto the sand, it gives way just enough to feel inviting, not enough to swallow. Fine grains cling to your skin, cool and slightly damp. Ahead, a narrow trail curves into the trees. Nothing about it seems deliberately formed, yet it is unmistakably a path. Plants bend lightly toward it, as if accustomed to some long-gone travelers. You take a few quiet steps forward, letting your breath adjust to the rhythm of the island. The canopy overhead filters sunlight into stray beams that drift through like wandering thoughts, illuminating patches of forest floor where tiny pale blue flowers grow in clusters. Their petals seem almost translucent, reflecting shades of the sea you just crossed. The deeper you walk, the more the island reveals its layers. Fallen leaves are thick in some places, forming a soft carpet that hushes each footstep. In others, the ground is bare rock, split in lines that echo the fractures of old lava flows. The duality feels natural: softness beside hardness, silence beside faint rustling, shadow beside filtered gold. A place built on contrasts that learned over centuries how to settle into balance. Small creatures dart between roots. Some you recognize, forest crabs, sun-striped lizards, but others seem different. There is a tiny bird with deep emerald feathers that shimmer only when it turns a certain angle. Another with a round shape and speckled wings hops close but remains unbothered by your presence, blinking slowly as though it already knows you mean no harm. You take time to admire them, allowing each small moment to become part of the island's unfolding story. The path widens slightly as you approach a clearing where the trees part enough to reveal a natural basin. In the center lies a pool of water so still it mirrors the leaves perfectly, duplicating the canopy as though the forest has a second world beneath the surface. A thin ribbon of fresh water trickles into it from somewhere beyond sight. The sound is delicate and consistent, like the smallest chime repeating itself at a thoughtful pace. Moss covers the stones around the pool, giving them an aged softness. And you notice indentations on one of the rocks that resemble shallow bowls, not carved but worn, perhaps from centuries of rain gathering in just the same places. You kneel briefly beside the water. Its clarity is startling. You can see smooth stones of every muted shade, grays, greens, browns, laid out naturally as if arranged by chance into a calming palette. Small fish drift lazily, moving with an ease that seems almost meditative. Everything here behaves as though nothing in the world exists outside this island's steady breathing. Continuing onward, you encounter a patch of trees thicker than the rest. Their roots rise above the earth in loops and arches, entwining in ways that look almost intentional, like structures grown instead of built. When you touch one of the trunks, the bark feels cool and ridged, and you sense the age held within it. Rings you will never see still pulse through the wood. A gentle breeze shifts overhead, releasing a soft cascade of dry leaves that drift downward, turning slowly like falling memories. Every few steps, new scents emerge, some sweet, others earthy, some sharp like citrus. The island is not presenting itself all at once. It is offering fragments to be pieced together gradually. You pause often, not because the path demands it, but because the atmosphere encourages it. Even the light seems to insist on lingering. The beams filtering through the canopy do not move quickly. They slide with deliberation, illuminating a fern here, a patch of moss there, as though choosing carefully what to reveal. As you continue through the forest, the faint sound of waves becomes just a distant hum, replaced by the soft chorus of insects and the creaking of branches swaying gently. You notice a fallen log ahead, covered entirely in velvety moss. Small pearlescent mushrooms sprout along its length in tidy rows, each one glistening faintly. You run your fingers carefully over their caps, feeling the smoothness that contrasts with the rough log beneath. Even decay here seems peaceful, transformed into a part of the island's quiet renewal. Beyond the log, the trees spread wider again, allowing more sunlight to warm the ground. You step into a patch of golden light, and the air feels slightly warmer. A bird glides overhead silently, its wings wide and patterned in deep brown swirls. It circles once before disappearing into branches on the far side of the clearing. There is no alarm, no urgency, only the steady continuation of life in a place that has never needed to rush. As the trail curves once more, you approach a gentle rise in the land.
From the top, you can see through a break in the trees to the coastline on the opposite side of the island. The sea there is calmer, a lighter blue, with thin lines of white foam tracing the shore. A series of tall rock formations jut from the water, each shaped uniquely. Some narrow, others thick and rounded. They stand like quiet guardians, weathered by uncounted tides, yet steady and unmoved. You take in the scene slowly, letting each detail settle into your thoughts. You begin descending, following the path as it slopes gently downward. The ground becomes sandy again, mixed with fragments of shells carried inland by storms long past. The sound of the surf grows clearer. The trees thin gradually until you step out onto a small, secluded beach on the island's far side. The sand here is finer, paler, and cool beneath your feet. Waves roll in with a hushed rhythm, brushing the shore with delicate strokes that feel almost deliberate in their gentleness. The sky has shifted into a soft gradient, blue deepening toward the horizon, a faint warm glow forming behind the clouds. You stand for a moment, letting the breeze move past you, carrying the scent of open water and distant rain. Everything feels slower here. The sea, the wind, even your heartbeat settling into the island's unspoken cadence. You listen to the waves, each one a quiet reminder that the island continues, endlessly patient, weather unseen. You take another step forward, ready to explore what waits beyond the curve of the shore, knowing the island is only beginning its quiet unfolding.
The beach stretches into a gentle curve, its pale sand marked only by the faint trails of small shoreline creatures that must have passed earlier in the day. The tide washes in with a calm steadiness, smoothing away each trace almost as soon as it appears. You begin walking toward the far end of the shore, where the sand meets a series of flat limestone terraces that rise in gentle steps toward the forest. These terraces catch the sunlight in soft reflections, each layer holding tiny imprints of shells and coral fragments from ages when the sea once reached higher. Approaching them feels like approaching a quiet archive left by the ocean itself. The rock beneath your feet is warm, not hot, and worn so smooth by centuries of water that your footsteps make almost no sound. Shallow pools form in the indentations, clear, still pockets of water where small, translucent fish move slowly, as if unsure whether you are part of the landscape or a disturbance. You crouch beside one of these pools and notice the delicate patterns of mineral lines etched into the rock, creating shapes that resemble faded maps. The pool's surface trembles with the slightest breeze, distorting these patterns into ripples that shift like thoughts. Past the terraces, the shoreline narrows into a path bordered by tall grasses that sway rhythmically. Their tips whisper against each other in a language shaped by wind and years of repetition. The path leads toward a stand of palm trees that grow in an organized but seemingly natural pattern, each one leaning slightly as if shaped by the same prevailing breeze. Their fronds rustle softly, overlapping in gentle waves of sound. Fallen coconuts lie among the roots, some cracked open to reveal hollow shells where small insects take shelter. Among these trees, the light changes again, less filtered, more direct, yet softened by the grown tint of the fronds above. You pause beneath one of the taller palms and look upward to see sunlight scattering through overlapping leaves, each layer creating its own shade of gold or green. The patterns shift with every movement of the branches. It feels like standing beneath a slow, natural kaleidoscope built by the island's quiet patience. Beyond the palms, the land rises slightly into a slope covered with dense vegetation. Leaves of every shape form a layered tapestry, broad fan-like fronds, small elliptical leaves that shimmer in the light, and long vines twisting in gradual, deliberate spirals. You lift one vine gently and feel its cool surface, noticing how it clings lightly to your fingers, leaving a faint trace of moisture. The island's humidity deepens here, making each breath feel fuller. As you continue upward, the ground becomes softer underfoot, covered in a thick blanket of fallen leaves in shades of brown, amber, and faded green.
They cushion each step, creating a muted rhythm that matches the slower heartbeat of the forest. The air holds the scent of earth mixed with distant sea salt, a blend that feels ancient and grounding. Higher on the slope, you notice an unusual formation, a cluster of stones arranged not quite naturally, not quite deliberately. They lie in a circle, their surfaces darkened by age and covered lightly in moss. Some are cracked, others smooth, all of them shaped by weather that must have passed through countless seasons. There is no sign of human craftsmanship, only the suggestion that time itself may have drawn them into this shape. A stillness hangs around the stones, as if even the wind pauses slightly when passing through. You sit on one of the flatter rocks, allowing the forest's quiet to settle around you. There is no animal call here, no rustle of movement. Only the soft hum of insects and the distant, muted join of waves reaching the shore. The stone beneath you feels cool and steady. For a moment, the island feels like a fragment suspended between past and present, untouched by the pace of the world beyond the waves that guard it. When you rise again, the path continues upward until it reaches a ridge that overlooks the center of the island. From here, the view shifts dramatically. The far side reveals a deep valley filled with dense emerald canopy. Trees of great height stand like silent guardians over the land, their crowns touching in an unbroken sheet of green. Mist waves gently between the branches, moving in slow patterns across the valley floor like breath. The light at this elevation takes on a faint silver quality, illuminating the mist in soft veils. You descend into the valley along a trail formed by roots that wind into natural steps. The air cools as the canopy thickens above you. Droplets of moisture fall occasionally from leaves, landing with delicate taps on rocks and soil. Each sound echoes lightly in the quiet space, blending with the deep forest scent, rich earth, moss, and the slight sharpness of aromatic bark. Walking further, you notice the vegetation changing. More ferns, fewer palms. Tall walking trees with exposed root systems arch over the ground like legs frozen mid-step. Some roots climb onto rocks, while others intertwine with neighboring trees, creating natural bridges for insects and small animals. The soft crunch of fallen twigs under your feet is the only sound marking your passage. A short distance ahead, sunlight spills into a clearing. At the center lies a meadow filled with pale yellow flowers swaying lightly. The petals are long and narrow, with a faint translucency that allows sunlight to pass, creating a subtle glow. Bees move lazily among them, their soft hum blending into the gentle rustle of leaves. The scene feels untouched, yet full of quiet life. Crossing the meadow, you reach another rise in the land, where the trees grow thinner again. From this height, you see something unusual far in the distance, a formation of dark stone rising above the vegetation. It is completely natural, yet its striking shape almost resembles a spire. Tall, narrow, and marked by deep vertical grooves, it stands alone, like a sentinel that has watched storms and seasons come and go without flinching. You stand there for a moment, taking in the silent presence of the spire, sensing that the island still holds countless layered stories waiting to unfold.
In the gentle quiet of this section, the story continues without any need for introductions or resets, only the steady drift forward into the world of forgotten islands and remote places. The ocean, tonight, feels like a vast library of sealed chapters, each one written on a fragment of land cut away from the wider world. These islands have held their shape through centuries of storms, migrations, shipwrecks, and drifting seeds. Yet they remain mostly unobserved, untouched by the loudness of history. There is something calming about knowing that these places do not demand attention. They simply exist, wrapped in long stretches of silence, carrying secrets that were never meant to be uncovered quickly. Far from trade routes and common maps lies the first place for this part. An island so small that satellites often mistake it for a shadow on the water. Its shoreline curves like a quiet breath, with beaches made of powdered shells crushed into near-white dust by centuries of waves.
The palms here lean slightly inland, shaped by a lifetime of one-direction winds. And the only sounds at dusk are the slow clicks of hermit crabs moving over the sand. On this island, scientists once discovered a species of land snail that lives entirely under fallen leaves, rarely surfacing, almost like a creature shy of light itself. The island's smallness protects it. Storms pass overhead with little intent, and even migrating birds seem to pause before realizing there's no need to stay long. Still, the place feels complete, like a tiny sealed world that carries all it needs within its narrow borders. Moving from this place, the journey follows a chain of low volcanic remnants, each one softened by rain and time. These islands sit on a sinking ridge that slowly pulls them back beneath the water, millimeter by millimeter each year. The people who lived here long ago carved pathways into the dark basalt cliffs, narrow steps that run directly into the sea. Researchers suggest these paths may have been part of ancient fishing methods, where nets were lowered from elevated ledges into deep blue channels. Over time, the stone has worn smooth, yet the grooves of old tools remain visible. Seabirds perch along the edges, using the carved stairs as resting points. The cliffs echo faintly when the waves strike them just right, creating a hollow sound like distant drums. It's a place where the past feels neither gone nor alive, just resting. The air grows heavier as the journey continues toward an island wrapped in dense mist, a place both humid and cool, where the forest canopy traps moisture in slow-moving clouds. Here, the ground stays soft underfoot, and every step releases the scent of wet leaves and hidden flowers. Moss grows even on the smooth surfaces of fallen branches, and small streams wind silently between stones coated with emerald green algae. Researchers found ancient pottery shards in these forests, delicate pieces marked with patterns resembling ripples. No village ruins exist here, only these faint objects suggesting that people once came, camped, cooked, and left. The mist preserves everything it touches. The sounds, the colors, the faint outlines of trails long reclaimed by the forest. Farther south sits a remote plateau island known for its flat summit and sudden cliffs. From above, it looks like a stone table balanced on the ocean. The top is covered with hardy grasses and stunted shrubs, all shaped by strong winds. Birds nest in deep pockets of the plateau, using the height as protection from predators. This island played a quiet but fascinating role in old navigation practices. Sailors hundreds of years ago used the shape of its flat silhouette as a nighttime guide, lining it up with specific stars to determine direction. Even though the technique has long faded from use, the island remains unchanged, steady in its position, still casting the same shape against the horizon it has offered for thousands of years. Continuing the quiet drift across the map, the next island reveals itself through its sound rather than its shape. Before its shore becomes visible, travelers hear the soft rhythmic tapping of water droplets falling into limestone pools inside the cliffs. These cliffs are carved with small channels that collect rainfall and direct it into underground chambers. Over thousands of years, the dripping sculpted smooth columns and shallow basins within the rock. Biologists discovered a species of blind shrimp living in these chambers, adapted to total darkness, navigating entirely through vibration. When a rare shaft of light enters through cracks in the stone, the water glows faintly, carrying tiny suspended minerals that reflect the brightness like swirling dust. Another remote place waits beyond a wide stretch of open water, a circular island with a lagoon at its center. The lagoon glows with bioluminescent plankton each night, triggered by the gentle movement of waves. When the tide shifts, the glow pulses in small waves, reflecting patterns similar to breathing. In earlier centuries, the island's community believed the lagoon housed a sleeping guardian spirit, and they built small stone markers around the shoreline. These markers still stand today, softened by moisture, partially covered with vines, but stable in their positions. The lagoon remains calm, even through storms, as if the inner circle of water is protected by an unseen hand. Near the edges of colder waters lies a rocky island where trees grow low and spread horizontally, shaped by relentless icy winds. The rocks here contain veins of minerals that glitter faintly at dawn, casting small reflections across the island's tidal pools. These pools support a unique type of seaweed that grows in tight spirals instead of wide sheets. This spiral growth helps the plant resist strong wave currents. Early visitors to the island documented the seaweed's unusual shape in hand-drawn journals, some of which still exist in maritime archives. The trees, though small, form dense networks of branches that create sheltered spaces where small animals find refuge during storms. The final place for this part sits deep in equatorial waters, an island that appears lush from afar but reveals its fragility up close. Its soil, rich in volcanic ash, collapses easily under heavy rain, forming temporary streams that carve the land into new shapes each season. The forest here is tall and narrow, with tree trunks rising straight toward pockets of sunlight. Researchers once found an abandoned stone ring near the island's center, partially buried under fallen branches. The ring is made of volcanic stones arranged in a pattern that does not match any known cultural constructions nearby. It suggests the presence of travelers, perhaps wanderers, sailors, or a small hidden community, who stayed only long enough to leave behind this single structure. Each of these islands, though small and remote, adds one more quiet thread to the broader tapestry of Earth's forgotten places. They remind us that the world is not only shaped by bustling cities and well-known landmarks, but also by these soft corners where the pace of time slows and nature continues its patient, steady work. These silent spaces keep Earth endlessly mysterious.
The quiet of this next stretch settles like a gentle layer of mist, allowing the mind to continue drifting through forgotten edges of the world. Here, the coasts become softer, the sands feel more ancient, and every detail seems wrapped in a silence that has lasted centuries. The journey continues along the abandoned contours of remote islands, following currents that carry stories without ever needing to be spoken. What unfolds is not a list, not a sequence, but a long breath of islands, each offering a small whisper of its own. Along one distant shoreline, pale stones form a curving path that disappears into the shade of wind-bent palms. These stones are smooth from decades of tide wash, and local fishermen once believed they were markers left by travelers who never returned. The tide moves in slow, quiet rhythms here, as if respecting the memory of those who carved routes before written maps existed. Soft waves sweep fragments of coral up the beach, leaving behind tiny traces of reefs that once thrived in waters far warmer than they are now. Farther along, another island's surface glows with a muted silver sheen when the moonlight touches it. The ground is covered in an unusual mineral dust that shimmers like frost, despite being tropical. Scientists once attempted to understand why the mineral concentrated only on this one island, but storms drove their camps away before they could uncover anything meaningful. Now, the island rests quietly again, largely unseen, watched only by birds that nest deep in its jagged cliffs. A small chain of rocky islets appears next in the drifting sequence, each shaped like a tilted tooth rising from the ocean floor. These stones have stood through thousands of storms, absorbing the echoes of waves that hit them with endless patience. Sailors used to say the rocks hummed during calm nights, resonating softly with the movements of deep-sea currents. Old journals mention these hums as if they were guiding signals, though no one has proven whether the phenomenon was real or imagined during long voyages. Not far from this chain lies an island covered by a dense lattice of mangroves. Their roots twist above the water like wooden veins, forming passageways that flood during high tide and reveal muddy paths when the water retreats. Beneath the mud, divers once discovered fragments of pottery shaped in patterns unfamiliar to any mainland culture. The pieces were worn, softened by years of submersion, but the markings hinted at rituals performed long before any surviving civilization recorded such traditions. As the exploration deepens, the dreamlike calm expands.
The air grows warmer, and a soft floral scent drifts across the surface of the sea. It comes from a remote island where delicate white blossoms only open at night. These flowers remain unseen by the modern world, blooming in small clusters along hidden ridges. Their pollen carries lightly on the wind, glowing faintly under moonlight. Ancient travelers believed the flowers protected lost sailors, guiding them towards safe shores when storms threatened. Then, as if following an unseen current, the journey moves across an isolated volcanic island, silent for hundreds of years. Its peak is carved by old lava rivers that cooled into strange wave-like shapes. The ground here is warm, not hot, filled with subtle geothermal murmurs that create a deep, calming hum beneath the feet of anyone who walks across it. Local legends once described the island as a sleeping creature whose heartbeat shaped the land. Whether myth or metaphor, the sensation of quiet pulsing is unmistakable. Beyond the volcanic rise, the scene transitions into a long stretch of pale, untouched coastline. The sand is unusually fine, almost powder-like, and retains the shape of any footprint for hours before the wind decides to erase it. This island sees no visitors now, but traces of old wooden platforms suggest that people once gathered here for star-watching ceremonies. The platforms have rotted away, leaving only the outline of beams that once supported rituals devoted to celestial patterns long forgotten. Another remote place emerges where steep cliffs drop sharply into turquoise water. Hidden caves tunnel through the rock, carrying the echoes of waves deep into the island's interior. When explorers first reached these caves decades ago, they found strange spirals etched into the stone walls. No animals on the island create such patterns, and no cultural group nearby claims responsibility for them. Over time, speculation gave way to quiet acceptance. Some things simply remain unexplained. The path shifts again to an island shaped like a crescent, its inner lagoon glowing brilliantly at night due to bioluminescent plankton. Every ripple sends gentle sparks across the water, creating lines of soft blue light that drift toward the shore. The glow intensifies during the warmest months, turning the entire lagoon into a slowly shifting constellation. Observers who camped nearby described the experience as standing inside a sky that had fallen to Earth. At the edge of another remote archipelago lies an island of towering stone pillars. These formations rise straight from the ground, arranged so precisely that early researchers assumed they were artificial. Later studies revealed they were natural basalt columns formed by ancient cooling lava. Yet their near-perfect geometric alignment still feels deliberate. The wind passes between the pillars in a pattern that produces low, flute-like tones, creating natural music that shifts with every season. Moving further into the dreamlike geography, a quiet island of red soil appears. The earth here is rich with iron, giving it a warm hue that contrasts strikingly with the emerald canopy above. Fossils found within its cliffs indicate that enormous prehistoric birds once lived here, creatures whose wingspans were wider than the length of a modern sailing boat. The island carries their memory in the patterns of deep claw marks preserved in hardened clay. Another distant place unfolds where the shoreline is lined with enormous driftwood trunks. These pieces of wood are larger than any known local trees, suggesting they floated from forests far across the ocean. Some trunks are bleached white from decades of sunlight, while others remain dark and textured. Islanders once fashioned boats from these trunks, believing the wood held protective spirits from the lands where the trees originally grew. The journey slows upon reaching a tiny island covered in only a few patches of grass and a single freshwater pool at its center. The water is unusually clear, so clear that its depth is impossible to gauge by sight alone. Divers once attempted to measure it, but were met with a strange downward current that prevented them from reaching the bottom. Legends claim the pool connects to underwater caverns, though no one has yet found an entrance.
The land ahead opens into a quieter realm, where the textures of forgotten places begin to shift again, revealing details shaped by centuries of isolation. There is no need for introductions here. Everything unfolds with the slow certainty of shorelines that have waded through countless tides. This part of the journey moves across islands shaped by wind, water, and geological patience, carrying with them stories that require no explanation, only observation. One of these islands stretches long and narrow, with a spine of chalk-white cliffs running through its center. These cliffs are carved by wind into patterns that look like frozen waves, their edges smoothed by salt carried from the ocean. At their base lie scattered fossils of ancient marine creatures, remnants from an age when this land sat beneath warm, shallow seas. Over time, the island rose quietly, and now these fossils rest far above the waterline, untouched except by the occasional bird's shadow. A different island emerges where the terrain is covered entirely in volcanic glass. Shards of obsidian glitter beneath the sun, forming natural mirrors that reflect the clouds moving overhead. Travelers who once passed through describe the island as appearing alive, with every gust of wind causing a ripple of shimmering reflections across the surface. Tools made from this glass have been found on neighboring islands, suggesting ancient seafarers once visited, though no settlements remain to tell their stories. Another place appears where the forest grows in layers, with ancient trees rising above younger ones in a clear temporal pattern. The tallest trees bend slightly toward the sea, shaped by generations of steady wind. Under their canopy lies a network of stone circles scattered across the forest floor. These stones are small and unadorned, but arranged with silent precision. Some believe they marked celestial events, while others think they were places of gathering. The forest has reclaimed most of their arrangement, leaving only hints of their purpose. Far to the south, a remote island plateau rises suddenly from the ocean, its top flat as though leveled by an unseen hand. The rock surface is dark and smooth, covered in patches of pale lichen that grow slowly across the stone. During certain times of the year, the lichen blooms into subtle shades of yellow and pink, turning the plateau into a quiet mosaic. Birds nest along the steep edges, and their calls echo through the empty air as if calling across immense distances. Another overlooked island sits low and broad, surrounded by shallow waters that glow bright turquoise. Beneath the surface lies a labyrinth of coral structures, shaped like twisting corridors. These formations shelter fish found nowhere else, species that evolved within the isolation of this protected environment. Divers once attempted to map the underwater passages, but found them too complex, shifting subtly with each season as currents sculpt new patterns and close old ones. From there, the path leads toward a place known for its unusual stones arranged across a coastal plain. These stones are massive, some as large as small houses, and they lean in slightly toward the center of the island. No marks exist to indicate carving, yet the shapes appear too deliberate to be accidental. Some researchers proposed that glacial movement arranged the stones long ago, but the island lies far from any glacial path. Theoretical explanations fade beneath the weight of silence that surrounds the plain, leaving the stones to stand unchallenged. A particularly gentle island follows where grasslands sway across low hills. The air is warm, and the scent of wild herbs drifts in soft waves across the surface. Hidden beneath the grass are remnants of low stone foundations, square and evenly spaced. These foundations mark the presence of an old settlement, though the people who once lived here left no pottery, tools, or carvings. The emptiness suggests a culture that favored simplicity, leaving behind only faint impressions of their dwellings and nothing more. Then comes a place where towering basalt cliffs rise sharply from the sea, their surfaces streaked with minerals that shimmer faintly even without sunlight. These cliffs produce strange echoes. Sounds bounce off their surfaces at odd angles, creating the illusion of multiple voices speaking at once. Early explorers noted this phenomenon, describing it as the island answering itself.
This effect intensifies during storms, when the wind moves through cracks in the cliffs, producing sustained tones that resemble a deep instrument playing across the ocean. A small chain of islands emerges next, connected by sandbars that vanish during high tide. Across these islands grow clusters of silver-leafed bushes that glitter in the light. The bushes thrive in salty soil where few other plants survive, suggesting they adapted uniquely to the harsh conditions. Local legends describe them as plants born from lightning strikes that fused minerals into the ground. While the scientific explanation remains unclear, the islands maintain an otherworldly look, especially at dawn, when the leaves catch the first light. From there, the journey turns toward an island crater filled with fresh water, its edges steep and densely vegetated. The water remains perfectly still except when touched by rain, and its clarity allows one to see deep into the crater's interior. At the bottom lie petrified tree trunks that once grew before the crater filled with water. These trees now exist as silent sculptures, preserved in mineral layers, marking a forgotten shift in the island's landscape. A distant place appears where the terrain consists of pale cliffs riddled with small caves. These caves are filled with fine sand that forms patterns when the wind moves through them. The sand shifts subtly each day, creating delicate lines that resemble writing. Yet the lines vanish overnight, replaced by new patterns with each sunrise. Some travelers believed the caves recorded the motion of time itself, while others saw it simply as the natural language of wind and stone. Finally, the path approaches an island where the ground vibrates faintly beneath the feet. This is not the tremor of impending activity, but a slow, rhythmic pulse caused by waves striking hollow chambers within the bedrock. The vibrations move through the island in cycles, creating a sense of calm attunement with the surrounding ocean. Those who have stood there describe the feeling as being aligned with the heartbeat of the earth itself.
The patterns that shape forgotten islands often begin with small shifts in climate, currents, and biological isolation that compound over centuries until the landscape becomes a world that feels entirely separate from the rest of Earth. On many of these remote islands, the first major influence is wind. Continuous, unbroken winds carve the coasts into softened cliffs while pushing seeds inland, forcing vegetation to grow in low, dense formations that protect themselves from salt spray. Trees lean at permanent angles. Shrubs grow compact and thick. The entire shoreline takes on a sculpted appearance, each curve shaped by the same invisible pressure repeating every day without pause. Layers of soil on these islands sometimes tell stories of ancient droughts and temporary floods that shaped local life cycles. A thin band of dark sediment might represent a year when volcanic ash settled on the island, altering soil chemistry and triggering unusual blooms. Another layer might contain crushed shells from a storm surge that reached far into the interior. These subtle clues reveal how ecosystems adapted to unpredictable events. Plants that could store water underground survived. Animals that could burrow or climb endured storms. Over time, these survival traits became defining characteristics of the island species. Some islands hold geological secrets beneath dense vegetation. Caverns run below the surface, cut by rainwater dissolving limestone over thousands of years. Inside these caverns are pools of perfectly still water that contain species found nowhere else. Blind crustaceans, pale fish, and slow-moving invertebrates populate these silent spaces where sunlight never reaches. Their existence shows how isolation can unfold in layers. Surface ecosystems shaped by storms, forest ecosystems shaped by shade, and hidden ecosystems shaped only by darkness and mineral-rich water. Across other islands, coral reefs form protective barriers that influence everything from tides to nutrient flow. These reefs act like living walls that slow incoming waves, creating lagoons with calm, shallow water. Within these lagoons, seagrass meadows spread across sandy floors, becoming nurseries for countless species. Small fish hide among the blades. Sea turtles graze quietly. Sharks visit only occasionally, moving slowly in the filtered light. The balance of these systems depends on temperature,
clarity of water, and the condition of the corals. When any one factor shifts, the lagoons change their character entirely. Inland forests often contain plants adapted to nutrient-poor soils. Instead of relying solely on the ground, some plants form partnerships with fungi that help them extract minerals. Others capture insects with sticky leaves or cup-shaped structures, supplementing their diet to survive where other plants fail. These adaptations create a botanical landscape that feels experimental, as if nature attempted multiple designs to see which could withstand the island's constraints. The result is a forest filled with unusual shapes, vivid colors, and behaviors not commonly seen elsewhere. Bird populations on remote islands develop behaviors that reflect the stability or instability of predators. In predator-free islands, birds become fearless, nesting on the ground, moving slowly, and responding to sound with curiosity rather than caution. When predators eventually arrive, sometimes through storms, sometimes by human introduction, the birds struggle to adapt quickly enough. This cycle of vulnerability and adaptation has shaped the fate of countless island species across history. Some evolved heavier bodies and larger wings to travel farther. Others developed louder calls to warn their groups. Some species survived by shifting nesting seasons or relocating to cliffs. On islands influenced by monsoon patterns, the entire ecosystem expands and contracts depending on rainfall. During wet seasons, streams flow through narrow channels, bringing nutrients to lower regions. Plants grow rapidly, producing fruits and flowers that attract insects and birds in high numbers. The forest becomes active and loud. In dry seasons, the same landscape becomes quiet. Cracked riverbeds appear. Leaves fall early to conserve moisture. Animals retreat to shaded areas or higher elevations. These repeated cycles carve long-term rhythms into the island, allowing only species that can adjust to these seasonal extremes to thrive. Some islands exist so far from the nearest landmass that the only organisms capable of reaching them are those carried by wind, waves, or birds. Seeds of lightweight plants drift across oceans, surviving salt exposure and germinating upon arrival. Floating logs sometimes carry insects. Storms occasionally transport spiders on silk threads. Over thousands of years, these rare arrivals accumulate, slowly building the island's biodiversity. Every species that establishes itself becomes part of a delicate sequence. Without competition from mainland species, they evolve into unique forms, some larger, some smaller, some more specialized. In certain regions, volcanic islands rise from the ocean floor still young in geological terms. Their landscapes contain sharp lava fields, warm soils, and mineral deposits that influence the earliest stages of plant colonization. Pioneer species like mosses and hardy grasses take hold first. Their roots begin breaking down volcanic rock into soil. As decades pass, shrubs appear. Eventually, forests grow where once only bare stone existed. This transformation occurs irregularly, depending on rainfall and eruptions, but it demonstrates how even the youngest islands carry the potential for complex ecosystems. Marine life surrounding these islands often follows deep water patterns. Upwellings bring cold, nutrient-rich water to the surface, feeding plankton blooms that support entire food webs. Whales migrate through these waters, feeding in predictable intervals. Schools of fish move in synchronized patterns shaped by temperature and current speed. The clarity of the water allows sunlight to penetrate deep, encouraging the growth of diverse coral structures. These underwater environments often contain more species than the islands themselves, forming another layer of forgotten beauty. Human absence is another defining element. Many remote islands lack permanent settlements, allowing ecosystems to develop uninterrupted. Without roads, urban noise, or artificial lights, nocturnal animals behave naturally. Sea turtles nest without interference. Birds migrate using the stars. Land animals follow ancient paths that remain unaltered. The silence of these places is not emptiness, but an intact system functioning as it always has. Such islands demonstrate how isolation crafts entire worlds. each shaped by time, climate, and the gentle pressure of natural forces working slowly yet consistently. Every shoreline, forest, and lagoon carries evidence of processes that unfolded across centuries.
The next stretch of our quiet journey drifts toward islands where human footprints are rare and where the rhythms of nature feel older than any recorded map. Starting with the remote specks scattered through the South Atlantic, places where temperate winds carve shapes into the cliffs and seabirds claim the ledges like ancient landlords. And for a long time, these islands remained unstudied simply because the surrounding waters were too unpredictable for early explorers. One of these solitary landforms rises in near-perfect symmetry, a volcanic triangle that appears and disappears behind curtains of sudden fog. And sailors once believed it was a phantom island, something that played tricks on the horizon. Though today, scientists recognize it as a classic shield volcano formed by a persistent mantle plume pushing upward for millions of years. Even now, the island's rocky outer ring is ringed by waters that shift from gray-green to almost black, colors influenced by mineral richness from underwater vents that continue to leak faint warmth into the open sea. The wildlife here evolved in unusual directions. Without large mammals or predators, many of the birds lost their instinct to flee, nesting directly on the ground, creating dense colonies that echo with soft rhythmic coos that sound like distant breathing. The vegetation grows low and tough. Thick-leafed shrubs cling close to the soil, shaped by relentless winds that glide uninterrupted across the open ocean before colliding with the island's steep slopes. These shrubs host countless insects found nowhere else, miniature species that adapted to survive with limited competition. And each tiny variation, slight changes in wing length or body shape, tells a story of isolation stretching back beyond human memory. Beyond the cliffs are caves carved by centuries of waves, and inside these hollows, researchers found layered deposits of salt crystals mixed with trace amounts of volcanic ash, forming natural records of eruptions that predate written history, helping scientists understand how frequently the volcano awakened in the island's early life cycle. Some caves hold pools of ultra-clear water that reflect the cave ceiling like mirrors, and their temperatures remain surprisingly consistent year-round because they're warmed from below by faint geothermal energy, a gentle reminder that the island is still alive beneath its quiet exterior. A few hundred kilometers away sits another island, far smaller, only a narrow strip of land broken into sharp basalt columns, resembling a shattered crown rising from the ocean. This little place is famous among seabird researchers because it serves as a breeding hub for multiple species that usually avoid each other elsewhere. Yet here they coexist peacefully due to the island's abundant fish supply and the absence of predators. The surrounding waters teem with nutrient-rich upwellings caused by deep currents pushing minerals upward each spring, triggering plankton blooms that ripple across the surface like pale green clouds, feeding vast networks of marine life. The birds time their nesting cycles to these blooms with remarkable precision, arriving within a window of just a few days each year, as though responding to a shared internal clock shaped by evolution. Scientists studying migration patterns discovered that many of these birds navigate using the Earth's magnetic field, detecting subtle shifts that guide them back to the same island even after journeys spanning thousands of kilometers. Over generations, researchers found rings from tracked birds that returned to the island for over 20 consecutive years, each time nesting in the exact same crevice or ledge, suggesting an inherited sense of place far more precise than previously understood. The island's high basalt pillars also harbor a rare moss species that only grows in areas sprayed directly by ocean mist. This moss forms delicate silver-green strands that retain moisture exceptionally well, allowing them to survive long dry spells. The moss's cellular structure reveals adaptations such as thick-walled spores designed to cling to rock surfaces even in high winds, ensuring the species spreads vertically rather than horizontally across the island.
Nearby underwater shelves create acoustic shadows, meaning sound travels strangely in this region, bouncing and bending so that researchers have recorded whale calls that seem to come from impossible directions. This acoustic distortion might explain ancient navigation myths describing singing islands or voices carried on the wind, stories once treated as superstition but now understood as natural distortions caused by interacting currents and the unique topography of the ocean floor. Farther east lies another isolated island, thick with forests that seem almost prehistoric, where giant ferns tower overhead and humidity hangs like a warm, translucent curtain. The soil is dark and nutrient-rich, primarily due to centuries of decayed plant matter building layer upon layer, creating a sponge-like terrain that absorbs and holds rainfall. In this dense environment, insects grow unusually large. Scientists discovered oversized beetle species whose lineage traces back to ancient relatives from the supercontinent Gondwana, indicating that the island may be a surviving fragment from land masses that drifted apart more than 100 million years ago. Reptiles here developed bright coloration, possibly as part of survival strategies involving mimicry or territorial signaling. Though some researchers believe the colors evolved simply because the isolated ecosystem allowed experimentation without many predators to limit mutations. In small clearings are pools of perfectly still water that host microecosystems with transparent crustaceans and microscopic organisms that glow faintly at night due to bioluminescent proteins likely developed to attract mates or deter predators. Trees in this forest twist in unusual spiral patterns caused by asymmetric sunlight exposure and strong seasonal winds, giving many trunks a corkscrew shape rarely seen elsewhere. Closer to the coast, the forest thins into wide meadows coated with dew each morning, where delicate ground orchids emerge only for brief periods after heavy rainfall, their petals so thin they appear translucent when touched by sunlight. Fossils found in shallow coastal cliffs reveal ancient species of small mammals, suggesting the island once supported richer biodiversity before rising sea levels isolated it from nearby continental shelves. Though remote, this island produces unique cloud formations due to warm air rising from the forest canopy and meeting cooler coastal winds, creating rolling wave-shaped clouds that drift across the sky like slow, pale billows. Satellite imagery shows these cloud waves from space, curling in predictable patterns that help climatologists study airflow in isolated ecosystems untouched by human structures or pollution. In all these places, the combination of isolation, time, and climate forms natural laboratories that teach researchers how life adapts when left alone for millennia. And each island adds one more thread to the intricate tapestry of evolution, geology, and atmospheric science.
The next segment drifts toward a chain of forgotten islands shaped not by towering volcanoes or lush forests, but by the slow, disciplined work of coral, where entire land masses rise only a few meters above the waterline, and every grain of sand has passed through the mouth of a living organism at least once in its history, forming some of the youngest and most fragile landscapes on Earth. And in these remote atolls, isolation does not only apply to animals or plants, but to the islands themselves, as they shift, erode, and regrow with the rhythm of the tides. Many of these places barely appear on maps because their outlines change with storms. A single cyclone can erase a beach, expose a hidden reef, or split an island in two, making them some of the most dynamic geological features in the ocean. Scientists studying these atolls focus on their role as climate indicators because the height of the islands reveals long-term sea level patterns, and coral composition preserves chemical signatures of ancient ocean temperatures. In one remote atoll, cores taken from deep beneath the surface showed layered records of warming and cooling phases spanning more than 3,000 years, allowing researchers to understand how past climate cycles affected coral growth. The living reefs surrounding these islands form underwater terraces, each representing a former sea level. The deeper terraces can be dated to periods when the ocean was significantly cooler and glaciers held more water in frozen reservoirs far from the tropics.
Above water, the islands host small stands of hardy vegetation, mostly salt-resistant shrubs and grasses that extend their roots laterally instead of downward, helping anchor the shifting sand. These plants trap wind-blown debris, gradually increasing island stability, though their fragile ecosystems can collapse if storms strip away too much soil at once. Many tiny land crabs live beneath these shrubs, aerating the ground with intricate tunnel networks. Their presence indirectly supports plant life by improving drainage and nutrient cycling. The mammals that inhabit these islands often arrive as accidental castaways. Rodents carried on storm debris, bats blown off course by ocean winds, and even domestic animals that swam to shore from shipwrecks centuries ago. While some introduced species became destructive, others integrated gently into the ecosystem, such as fruit bats that pollinate nighttime blooming flowers found nowhere else. These nocturnal blooms evolved to open only under moonlight, releasing faint, sweet fragrances that help guide pollinators across wide open stretches of lagoon. Inside the lagoons are creatures adapted to calm, shallow waters: needlefish with thin, reflective bodies, rays with sand-colored wings, and small sharks that spend their juvenile years in the protected shallows before venturing into deeper sea. The stillness of lagoon water creates remarkable optical clarity, allowing sunlight to penetrate to surprising depths and enabling dense algae growth on the lagoon floor. These algae beds are crucial for juvenile marine species, forming nurseries that support populations far beyond the island itself. Just beyond the atolls lies another category of forgotten islands born from tectonic uplift rather than volcanic eruption, where sections of ancient seabed rose abruptly due to pressure shifts in the Earth's crust. These islands feature cliffs carved from limestone that was once coral reef millions of years ago, now towering high above the ocean where reef fish once swam. Fossils embedded in the cliffs reveal shells and tiny marine organisms perfectly preserved despite their elevation, providing evidence of the planet's shifting plates. The surface of these uplifted islands is uneven, containing sinkholes, ridges, and deep limestone caverns formed when rainwater slowly dissolved calcium-rich rock over thousands of years. Some caves hold subterranean lakes where unique species of blind fish and crustaceans evolved in isolation, their bodies pale and translucent due to generations spent in complete darkness. These hidden lakes maintain stable temperatures year-round and contain water with unusual mineral balances that support organisms found nowhere else. Explorers entering these caves describe the faint echo of dripping water and the sensation of warm air rising from deeper passages, hinting at geothermal interactions far below the surface. On the flatter sections of these islands, soil accumulates in gentle depressions, enabling forests of short, twisted trees that spread outward instead of upward due to persistent coastal winds. These trees form dense thickets filled with insects that developed specialized feeding habits. Some beetles evolved mandibles shaped to scrape minerals off limestone, while other insects developed symbiotic relationships with fungi that thrive in the island's humid microclimates. Toward the coast, the limestone breaks into jagged formations that resemble teeth, sharp and irregular, created by centuries of acid rain dissolving the softer minerals. These natural structures protect the inner island from waves during storms, acting as a jagged shield that absorbs the impact of crashing surf. Farther inland, shallow freshwater ponds accumulate during rainy seasons, attracting migratory birds that use the islands as temporary resting stations during long ocean crossings. Many of these birds fly from one continent to another, stopping only for a day or two to feed on insects, crustaceans, and freshwater snails that thrive in these temporary wetlands. Researchers tracking their movements discovered that birds return to the same ponds year after year with astonishing consistency, guided by inherited migratory pathways encoded in their biological clocks. Yet another category of forgotten islands exists where volcanic activity never quite completed the job of forming a proper mountain, resulting in flat black sand islands created by underwater eruptions that cooled near the surface but didn't build tall peaks. These islands consist of fragmented lava, smooth basalt stones, and glassy volcanic shards that crunch underfoot. Their beaches stretch wide and empty, exposed to strong waves that continuously rearrange the shoreline. Because the soil is young and nutrient-poor, only the hardiest pioneer plants can establish roots, such as iron-rich grasses and shrubs with waxy leaves that resist salt spray. Over time, these plants trap organic debris, slowly enriching the soil and allowing more complex vegetation to take hold. The tidal pools on these islands contain unusual organisms adapted to rapid temperature shifts. During low tide, the pools heat under direct sun, and during high tide, cold ocean water rushes in. Only a handful of marine species tolerate such cyclical extremes, yet they thrive here, demonstrating adaptability that helps scientists study resilience in fluctuating environments. Wind plays an outsized role on these black sand islands, sculpting dunes that migrate across the landscape, burying old lava fields and exposing new ones. These dunes often shift several meters every year, creating a constantly evolving terrain. At night, the islands cool rapidly because basalt loses heat faster than lighter-colored sands. This cooling creates fog banks that roll inland from the ocean and condense on rocks, forming a vital source of moisture for the sparse plant life that survives here. In the center of some islands, faint geothermal vents still release warm air, producing pockets of microhabitats where certain insects and moss species cluster despite the harsh surrounding conditions. Across these different formations, coral atolls, uplifted limestone platforms, and low volcanic flats, each island tells a different chapter of Earth's geological story, shaped by unique combinations of time, climate, biology, and tectonic forces.
The chain of remote places now extends into the colder latitudes, where forgotten islands stand against the gray horizon like silent monuments shaped by ice, wind, and restless seas. And here the landscape takes on a harsher clarity, stripped of the warm colors found in tropical clusters, leaving only pale stone, dark water, and skies that cycle endlessly through mist and dim light. These islands begin with those formed through glacial retreat, where massive sheets of ancient ice once carved deep channels into the bedrock, creating fjords and steep cliffs that drop abruptly into freezing ocean trenches. Glacial islands often carry boulders that do not match the local geology, transported from distant regions during the last ice age, leaving behind scattered clues about continental drift and the movement of prehistoric glaciers. The ground is covered in lichen that grows so slowly it can take a century to expand a few centimeters, creating mottled patterns of gray-green mosaics on the rock. These lichens survive by clinging to moisture from fog and melting frost, making them among the oldest living organisms in these regions. Small, hardy flowers appear only during short summers, opening for brief periods before the temperature falls again, their seeds transported by wind that crosses empty miles of ocean. The wildlife on these cold islands has adapted to an unforgiving rhythm. Seals haul out on icy beaches to rest between long hunting dives, their bodies insulated by thick layers of blubber. Rare species of Arctic foxes roam the rocky slopes, their coats shifting color with the seasons, blending seamlessly into snow-covered terrain in winter and gray landscapes in summer. Migratory birds use these islands as essential breeding grounds, constructing nests on narrow cliff ledges where predators are unlikely to reach. Puffins dig burrows in grassy patches, raising chicks that fledge quickly before storms return. The ocean surrounding these islands contains nutrient-rich currents that attract whales. Humpbacks feed on dense krill swarms, and their low-frequency calls travel for miles, vibrating through the cold water like slow, distant thunder. Some of these glacial islands hide caves carved directly by melting ice, where tunnels wind into the bedrock and retain temperatures far below the surface climate. Inside, ice crystals form intricate patterns resembling white feathers or delicate frozen leaves, and in still pockets of air, faint echoes resonate for several seconds due to the acoustics of narrow passages. Researchers entering these caves often encounter ancient air trapped in bubbles of deep ice layers, providing atmospheric samples from thousands of years ago. These caves are extremely fragile. A small increase in global temperature can destabilize entire sections within a single season.
Farther south in the subpolar region lie volcanic islands emerging from the cold sea like isolated towers, formed when underwater magma met frigid water, solidifying in abrupt shapes. Their surfaces are dark and rugged, covered with black basalt flows and sharp ridges molded by centuries of freezing waves. Steam occasionally rises from geothermal vents, creating strange scenes where warm air bursts into icy surroundings, forming clouds that drift slowly across barren slopes. Moss grows in geothermal pockets, spreading outward in patches of vibrant green that contrast sharply with the black stone around them. These islands support colonies of penguins that shuffle across icy plateaus and dive into icy waters with surprising speed, relying on their dense feathers and insulating fat layers to maintain warmth. In some places, the cliffs of these volcanic outcrops hold ancient layers of ash imprinted with fossilized feathers or plant fragments from long-extinct species. Each layer provides a geological timestamp of eruptions, climate shifts, and biological changes. High winds sculpt the cliffs into natural sculptures, carving pillars, arches, and narrow bridges that appear unstable yet persist for centuries. During winter, frost wedges form within cracks of the rock. Expanding ice widens the cracks, gradually reshaping the cliffs with each freeze-thaw cycle. These features evolve slowly but continuously, giving scientists insight into long-term erosion processes in extreme climates. Transitioning toward remote island plateaus formed by millennia of erosion, the ground becomes flatter, but the terrain remains desolate. These islands consist of ancient metamorphic rocks smoothed by ice and sea, forming broad surfaces that stretch for miles with almost no elevation. The soil layer is thin, allowing only low shrubs and dwarf birch trees to grow, their branches twisted by relentless winds. The vegetation here grows horizontally rather than vertically, hugging the ground to conserve heat and avoid damage from storms. In summer, shallow ponds appear as snowmelt gathers in depressions, attracting insects that have adapted to cold climates by developing natural antifreeze proteins in their bodies. These insects become an essential food source for nesting birds, supporting a brief but intense cycle of reproduction before cold returns. One remarkable feature of these plateaus is the presence of patterned ground, geometric formations created by repeated freezing and thawing. Stones arrange themselves into circles, polygons, or winding stripes without human influence. These patterns emerge naturally as soil expands and contracts, pushing rocks into symmetrical arrangements. The patterns spread across large areas, creating a quiet, surreal landscape that feels almost purposeful in design. Scientists study these features to understand permafrost behavior and soil dynamics in cold climates. Moving eastward across a different chain of forgotten islands reveals ones formed by tectonic compression rather than glaciation or volcanism. Here, continents once pressed together, pushing slabs of rock upward at sharp angles, forming jagged peaks that rise suddenly from the sea. The cliffs are composed of folded layers, each representing an ancient era of Earth's history compressed into narrow lines. Fossilized remains of prehistoric sea creatures appear high above modern sea levels, showing evidence of how much the land has risen. These islands contain deep valleys where nutrient-rich soils collect, allowing small forests to form even in cold environments. Evergreen trees grow in tight clusters, using collective root systems to anchor themselves against strong winds. Wildlife in these valleys includes small cold-adapted mammals and birds that rely on sheltered pockets for nesting. Streams formed by snowmelt cut through the rock, creating small waterfalls that freeze into columns of blue ice during winter. The sound of cracking ice echoes through the valleys as temperatures fluctuate. In some places, mineral-rich springs flow from deep underground, depositing colorful layers of calcium and iron on nearby stones, forming natural terraces that resemble miniature steps leading up the slopes. The ocean surrounding these tectonic islands is colder and deeper than around most island chains. Strong currents carve submarine canyons that channel cold water upward, supporting large fish populations. Orcas patrol these waters, their dorsal fins slicing through the surface as they hunt in coordinated groups. On stormy days, waves crash against the cliffs with immense force, throwing spray high into the air and generating booming sounds that reverberate across the island. These cold, forgotten places reveal how isolation, climate, and geological forces shape land in ways both subtle and dramatic. They preserve ancient stories in stone, ice, and wind, offering glimpses into environments where life persists quietly, adapting to cycles of darkness, cold, and shifting terrain.
The quiet drift continues as the distant outline of another forgotten archipelago softens at the horizon, a place where the air tastes faintly of sea salt and old volcanic stone, and where the past seems suspended in the warm, steady breath of the tide. Some islands remain hidden behind rolling mist, even when the sky above is clear, their silhouettes wavering like memories that never fully return. And on one such island, an abandoned network of stone terraces descends toward the beach in gentle steps, each level blanketed with moss that glows faintly under the pale light of dusk. Stories say people once grew medicinal plants here, plants believed to listen to the wind for guidance. And though no trace of those rituals remains except the careful placement of stones, the terraces hold an atmosphere of patient silence, as though still waiting for the soft footfalls of someone who never came back. Moving onward, another small island rises like a crescent of dark basalt, its cliff sides polished smooth by centuries of storms. And on its highest point rests a circular arrangement of stones that archaeologists cannot confidently date. Some believe they were used to track the angle of the setting sun during solstices, while others think they might simply be remnants of shelters long decayed. But whatever their origin, they radiate a sense of quiet purpose beneath the constant sweep of ocean wind. A little farther, beyond a stretch of calm water that reflects the pale sky with glass-like stillness, lies a sandy spit where countless fragments of ancient pottery wash ashore. None of them form complete vessels, yet their patterns share an unexpected symmetry, repeating spirals and wave shapes that hint at a culture deeply attuned to the rhythms of tides and currents. Sometimes the waves leave behind shards glazed in hues no longer common, suggesting techniques lost to time. And holding any of them in the hand feels like touching a moment from centuries ago, softened by distance but never entirely erased. Continuing the slow drift, there is an island ringed by mangroves whose roots form natural corridors just wide enough for a small boat to glide through. And within this green maze, the air grows warmer and sweeter, filled with the faint scent of flowers that bloom only at night. Old travelers wrote of fireflies gathering above these roots in numbers so great they made the passages glow like underwater constellations. And though modern sightings are rarer, a quiet shimmer can still appear here when the moon is thin and clouds rest low over the sea. Past these warm waters lies a colder, more rugged coast where cliffs rise in jagged layers colored by iron and copper. And at the base of one such cliff is a cave that floods and drains with the tides, creating a soft, resonant hum that echoes across the shoreline. Some say the sound resembles distant chanting. Others hear it more as a slow, pulsing heartbeat from deep within the earth. But whatever the interpretation, the cave has drawn lone visitors for generations, each arriving curious and leaving contemplative, as though the steady rhythm of water against stone shifts something subtle inside. Drifting beyond this rugged edge, the path crosses a narrow channel filled with kelp forests that sway like slow-moving curtains beneath the surface. And beneath their long green ribbons, small fish flash silver before disappearing into shadow. These forests once sheltered entire communities of seabirds nesting along the cliffs above, their calls forming a layered chorus that filled the air. And though many still return each year, the overall quietness of this place hints at cycles shifting slowly through time, guided by forces older than any record of human presence. Ahead, another island appears where the sand forms soft ripples that feel almost sculpted, ridges shaped by winds so gentle they seem barely present. And scattered across the interior are chunks of coral left by ancient storms, bleached white and porous like artifacts from a vanished submarine world. Walking among them gives the impression of exploring the ocean floor lifted into the air.
each fragment carrying the subtle geometry of polyps that once lived in warm, shallow seas. Beyond this dreamlike landscape lies an island whose interior is home to a tiny freshwater pool so clear the stones beneath appear magnified. And the pool is fed by a spring that emerges from a crack in the bedrock. Local traditions speak of the spring as a source of renewed clarity, a place where travelers would rinse their hands before continuing onward, believing that water untouched by salt helped them leave previous worries behind. Continuing the drift, the next island reveals tall grasses blowing in long, synchronized waves, their golden blades catching the last traces of sunlight in a way that makes the whole plain shimmer softly. Along the edges of this field stand wooden posts carved with patterns so weathered their original forms can barely be guessed. Yet their arrangement aligns with points along the horizon where stars appear earliest on clear nights, suggesting some ancient group used this gentle landscape to track the sky's slow motions. Crossing back toward the coastline, the sea grows calmer again, and an island emerges where the only sounds are the soft rustle of palm fronds and the occasional drop of fruit falling into sand. The air here holds the faint sweetness of fermentation, and old stories say the fruits were once collected to make a mild drink used in quiet evening ceremonies, rituals centered on gratitude for another day of safe return from fishing voyages. Further along the drifting path, another remote island stands almost entirely covered in smooth, rounded stones that produce musical tones when struck lightly together. Storms sometimes roll the stones into new arrangements, changing the natural pitch of the beach, and many travelers report that the shore seems to hum just before dawn, as though the stones resonate with the cooling of the night air. The final stretch of this segment passes an island shaped like a curled leaf, where a narrow ridge runs through its center, allowing anyone walking along it to see both coasts at once. One side holds waves that break in steady rhythmic folds, while the other remains nearly motionless, a lagoon protected by a natural ring of reef, creating a visual contrast that feels almost symbolic, as though the island itself embodies a gentle balance between movement and stillness. In this lingering quiet, the drifting continues onward toward the next cluster of forgotten shores, carried by the soft, unhurried pull of the evening tide.
The ideas surrounding forgotten islands continue to reveal how isolation shapes biology, culture, and geology, allowing each location to evolve subtle patterns in vegetation, wildlife behavior, mineral distribution, and atmospheric character, creating a quiet archive of natural rhythms that unfold without interruption. When researchers examine these remote environments, they often find that the absence of continuous human influence allows ecosystems to follow ancient trajectories, preserving genetic lineages that diverged thousands or even millions of years ago, resulting in species with unique forms of camouflage, distinct foraging styles, and rhythms of reproduction synchronized with the island's microclimate rather than global seasonal patterns. The soils on these islands often contain mineral signatures that hint at forgotten volcanic episodes or slow uplift processes, revealing tectonic histories written in layers of compressed ash, basalt fragments, and old coral structures now stranded above present sea level due to gradual geological shifts. Winds here move differently, shaped by uninterrupted ocean corridors, forming gentle atmospheric corridors that guide migrating birds into soft, reliable loops, making the islands resting points in patterns that rarely change. When paleobiologists map these isolated ecosystems, they often discover creatures that survived global extinctions by pure isolation, living in pockets where ancient forests remained untouched, protected by cliffs, reefs, or currents that acted like natural borders, reducing the arrival of predators or invasive species. Many forgotten islands hold underground freshwater lenses formed by centuries of rainfall filtering through porous rock, storing paleowater that predates human civilization, and offering clues about old rainfall patterns from periods like the mid-Holocene, when monsoon systems shifted and sea levels oscillated. On other islands, the rock layers include remnants of meteor impacts, small, unnoticed elsewhere, where microtectites trapped in sediment hint at forgotten cosmic events.
Even the air on these islands carries subtle differences, with trace compounds from specific vegetation influencing humidity in ways distinct from continental environments. Over long periods, these patterns shape not only plants and wildlife, but also the psychological atmosphere felt by researchers who visit, noticing how sound behaves differently across quiet coastlines or dense interior forests. Forgotten islands often appear on old maritime charts with vague labels or inaccurate outlines because early navigators only glimpsed them through fog or heavy swell, marking approximations that created legends about lands that shifted or vanished. Some islands documented in the 18th century no longer exist, erased by volcanic eruptions or rising sea levels that reclaimed shorelines, leaving only fragments of basalt pinnacles that now serve as seabird colonies. In some cases, islands grow instead, as coral polyps and reef frameworks expand outward, collecting sand over generations until vegetation slowly colonizes the new surface, creating a timeline of biological succession that unfolds across centuries. Within the canopies of such islands, researchers occasionally find old species of insects that display instinctive patterns unchanged by contact with predators unfamiliar to them, making their behaviors almost like windows into evolutionary pasts. When archaeologists explore remote islands that once supported isolated human groups, they find stone tools shaped differently from those on nearby continents, often adapted for narrow ecological niches, such as harvesting shellfish unique to local tidal cycles or weaving fibers from endemic plants with unusual tensile strength. Remnants of simple dwellings or stone boundaries suggest that these communities lived with minimal disruption to the landscape, leaving behind only hints of their rituals, diets, or astronomical observations. Some forgotten islands contain rock carvings aligned with specific star paths, indicating that even isolated communities kept a form of cosmic awareness, connecting their existence with skies unchanged by metropolitan light. Many stories about these places come from oral histories recorded by early visitors, describing strange lights at night that were later understood to be bioluminescent plankton washing ashore in dense clusters, glowing softly under the moon. Some islands produce natural sounds, wind tunnels, hollow cliffs, or blowholes that early sailors mistook for animal calls or supernatural forces. In forests where human footsteps are rare, animals behave differently, showing little fear, allowing biologists to observe natural foraging cycles rarely seen elsewhere. Over thousands of years, seeds drifted to these remote lands through ocean currents, enabling plants with strong buoyancy or salt-resistant outer shells. Each island's botanical identity becomes a record of distant storms or old trade winds that carried seeds farther than expected. Some forgotten islands host freshwater crabs with entirely unique carapace patterns shaped by mineral content in the water. Others have reptiles that evolved to smaller or larger sizes due to limited resources, following island dwarfism or gigantism principles. Geological surveys reveal that many islands sit on top volcanic hotspots that shift slowly, creating new land in cycles that span millennia. The sand on their beaches sometimes contain rare minerals transported through deep-sea vents, giving certain shorelines subtle color variations noticeable only under specific light. In coastal shallows, fish populations often form closed genetic loops, producing coloration patterns distinct from their open ocean relatives. Birds nesting on these islands learn wind routes by instinct, gliding in controlled arcs that mirror air currents shaped by the island's unique geometry. When climate researchers measure temperature and rainfall, they often find that isolated islands capture atmospheric quirks caused by evaporative patterns from surrounding waters, creating microseasons different from those of the nearest continent. For historians studying forgotten trade routes, these islands act as markers of how ancient sailors navigated, resting on shores where they left pottery shards or fire pits that still contain charcoal, which can be carbon dated to determine the timing of their journeys. The coral reefs surrounding many remote islands sometimes preserve chemical signatures of old ocean temperatures, offering a timeline of climate change across centuries. Tidal pools host organisms adapted to fluctuations in salinity, heat, and oxygen, demonstrating microevolutionary responses observable within just a few generations. Many islands contain caves decorated not by humans but by geological processes. Stalactites shaped by mineral-rich drips influenced by the island's humidity cycles, creating natural archives of environmental change. When explorers map the terrain, they often find ridges formed by the uplift of ancient coral shelves that once thrived under shallower seas. Even the silence on these islands becomes a form of data, reflecting the absence of large predators or heavy winds, creating acoustic environments where small sounds travel further, influencing animal communication patterns. And as researchers continue to document these remote places, each island reveals another subtle thread in the vast and intricate tapestry of Earth's natural history, shaped not by dramatic events, but by slow, continuous processes that unfold quietly across deep time.
Many forgotten islands hold atmospheric patterns that seem almost unchanged for centuries, where temperature gradients, cloud formations, and wind behaviors settle into long-term rhythms shaped by the island's geometry, ocean currents, and surrounding reefs, creating microclimates that allow scientists to reconstruct older weather cycles without relying entirely on modern instruments, because these places are so stable and undisturbed that even subtle variations in humidity carry historical meaning. When researchers collect pollen samples from sediment layers in island lagoons, they often uncover timelines of vegetation change that trace rises and falls in rainfall, revealing drought cycles or centuries of increased monsoon activity preserved like quiet signatures in the soil. These natural records help reconstruct climate patterns from eras when no written documentation existed. On some islands, mineral deposits and cave formations provide similar clues, with thin mineral bands showing how groundwater chemistry changed in response to ancient ocean temperatures, allowing scientists to match local climate histories with global climatic events such as the medieval warm period or the Little Ice Age. Animal behavior on forgotten islands also contributes to this broader understanding. Certain bird species nest according to pressure changes in the atmosphere, arriving earlier or later depending on subtle shifts in storm frequency. And long-term observations of these cycles reveal that isolated islands serve as natural barometers for regional climate variability. In the underwater zones surrounding these islands, coral skeletons preserve chemical markers that indicate temperature changes over centuries. And because many of these reefs remain intact and undamaged, they provide some of the clearest archives of old ocean conditions, giving insight into how ecosystems responded to earlier warming phases, helping scientists predict future patterns. Some islands display extraordinary resilience to storms because their vegetation has adapted to repeated cyclonic activity, forming densely intertwined root networks capable of stabilizing dunes and cliffs even under extreme weather. And by studying the structure of these plants, botanists gain insight into natural defenses that once protected coastlines before human interference altered the balance. Forgotten islands often harbor endemic species that illustrate unusual pathways of evolution, such as flightless insects surviving on mineral-rich cliffs where their ancestors once glided, or amphibians adjusting to brackish ponds left behind by ancient tsunamis, illustrating how animals adapt to isolated and shifting environments. Geological studies show that some islands were once part of larger land masses before rising seas cut them off, leaving behind pockets of terrain where pre-Holocene plant species survived long after their continental counterparts disappeared, turning these islands into living museums of botanical ancestry. The soils themselves often contain remnants of old forests, preserved under layers of volcanic ash or storm sediments. And by analyzing these remnants, scientists reconstruct ecosystems that existed thousands of years earlier, revealing how plant communities expanded, contracted, or shifted across different climate phases. Under the dense canopies of certain forgotten islands, researchers encounter insects with luminescent traits not found anywhere else, their glow shaped by generations of adaptation to thick forest darkness, hinting at environmental pressures that crafted such bioluminescent displays. Small mammals on these islands often exhibit unique behaviors or physical traits resulting from generations of isolation,
elongated limbs for climbing particular tree structures, specialized diets built around single endemic plants, or altered sleep cycles shaped by the absence of predators. These biological details reflect long, unbroken evolutionary pathways, providing a glimpse into how life organizes itself when left in stable isolation. The freshwater systems on forgotten islands are equally remarkable, with some containing ancient microbial communities that date back thousands of years, living in mineral-rich pools that formed from groundwater trapped between shale layers or volcanic ridges, revealing chemical compositions that map out the island's hydrological history. Some islands hold freshwater caves where stalactites grow in rhythmic bands influenced by rainfall patterns, making them natural archives of climate change. The oxygen isotopes within these formations reveal centuries of humidity variations. On islands where volcanic activity once shaped the land, old lava tubes form mysterious subterranean corridors hosting ecosystems independent from surface climates. Sustained by slow mineral drips and colonies of organisms adapted to near darkness. These environments allow biologists to examine how species survive without sunlight, following metabolic pathways that hint at ancient evolutionary strategies. The coastlines of forgotten islands reveal additional layers of history. Wave-cut terraces show how sea levels shifted, marking periods of global warming or cooling across thousands of years. Fossils preserved in limestone cliffs often include ancient marine species that disappeared elsewhere, creating a timeline of biological change etched into the island's perimeter. Some islands exhibit unusual magnetic signatures due to mineral distribution in old lava flows, allowing geophysicists to map the historical movement of tectonic plates by studying how magnetic particles align with Earth's shifting magnetic field. This provides precise chronological markers for past geological events. In certain forgotten islands, inland basins collect fine layers of dust originating from distant deserts, carried across the ocean by seasonal winds. The chemistry of these layers reveals the intensity of old droughts, storm patterns, and atmospheric pathways that shifted over centuries. When archaeologists search for signs of earlier human visits, they often discover stone flakes or fire pits buried under volcanic soil or sand dunes, marking ancient maritime routes and supplying evidence that early sailors navigated further than previously believed. Some islands contain abandoned terraces carved into hillsides, suggesting that humans once cultivated small crops in microclimates where moisture collected in predictable cycles, leaving behind remnants of irrigation channels shaped by simple stonework. Rock shelters sometimes contain charcoal from old hearths, and isotopic analysis of this charcoal reveals what plants or animals formed ancient diets, linking these forgotten islands to broader migratory narratives. Maritime cultures frequently use these islands as temporary refuges, leaving pottery shards or bones that help reconstruct their travel patterns. Over time, storms erased many traces of these visits, burying evidence beneath shifting dunes or carrying artifacts into coastal shallows now explored by underwater archaeologists, who identify remnants of ancient boats or tools trapped in coral growth. Some islands also contain enigmatic stone markers whose purpose remains uncertain, possibly used to track solaces or tidal cycles. Meanwhile, the untouched forests, mineral caves, tidal flats, and isolated cliffs across these forgotten islands continue to preserve delicate clues about Earth's shifting climate, migrating species, ancient cultures, and geological transformations, each one forming a quiet link in the long chain of natural history written across deep time, where data gather silently in the land itself.
Many forgotten islands show patterns of long-term ecological isolation that allow scientists to reconstruct ancient biological processes, because these islands act like sealed laboratories where species have evolved without interruption for thousands of years, producing distinct adaptations shaped by geography, climate rhythms, and limited resources. In these environments, slow evolutionary experiments unfold in silence, where one can observe how organisms diversify in response to the pressures of distance and solitude. Some islands contain plant species that adapted to nutrient-poor volcanic soil by forming deep root systems that spiral down through layers of old basalt, drawing minerals from ancient rock once formed under intense geological activity. And studying these roots helps researchers understand how vegetation stabilizes terrain after centuries of erosion. In places where fresh water is scarce, trees evolved leaves coated with fine wax layers that condense moisture from night mist, channeling droplets down their stems into the soil, demonstrating a natural method of water harvesting that predates human technology. In the understory of forgotten island forests, tiny mammals developed sensitive whiskers that help them navigate thick vegetation in conditions where sunlight barely reaches the ground, allowing them to detect vibrations from insects hidden under rotting logs, illustrating how sensory adaptation can compensate for low-light environments. Along the coastlines, tide pools host micro-ecosystems that shift subtly with lunar cycles, creating predictable changes in salinity and temperature that guide breeding patterns in marine invertebrates. These fluctuations serve as natural records of how coastal life responded to sea level rises and falls over centuries. Some islands contain beaches where the sand is composed of rare minerals or biogenic fragments produced by long-extinct creatures, leaving behind a geological fingerprint of ancient life that helps scientists map ocean chemistry during earlier epochs. Inland swamps on remote islands sometimes preserve peat layers with trapped DNA from ancient plant and insect species, allowing researchers to reconstruct ecosystems that existed thousands of years ago. This genetic material reveals how species migrated, vanished, or adapted as climates shifted. Certain insects found on isolated cliffs evolved elongated limbs to grip wind-battered rocks, their limbs shaped by generations of exposure to powerful gusts channeled through narrow island passes. And these physical traits highlight how microclimates influence body structure over time. On some islands, land crabs became dominant herbivores, shaping vegetation patterns by consuming fallen fruits and leaves, redistributing nutrients as they dig burrows that aerate the soil, making these crustaceans key engineers in their ecosystems. Their behavior provides insight into how nutrient cycles operate in systems lacking mammals. In freshwater caves hidden beneath limestone hills, blind shrimp and translucent fish developed metabolic strategies that reduce energy expenditure in environments with limited food resources, offering clues about survival mechanisms in extreme ecosystems. Some islands once connected to continental shelves display fossilized coral terraces that reveal how fast sea levels rose after the last glacial period, preserving a timeline etched into coastal cliffs showing distinct phases of ocean encroachment. The reefs surrounding these islands often feature coral colonies hundreds of years old. Their growth rings contain chemical traces of ancient temperature fluctuations, forming a biological archive that parallels ice core records from polar regions. In volcanic islands, lava tubes run beneath forests like buried corridors, where mineral deposits form delicate structures that help geologists map past eruptions and understand how volcanic events shaped island landscapes. Certain islands sit atop tectonic boundaries where microearthquakes occur regularly, and sensors placed along coastal ridges capture patterns that indicate how stress builds and releases over time, offering clues to larger seismic systems. Some forgotten islands contain saltwater lakes formed by ancient storm surges that breached coastal ridges, trapping ocean water inland. Over centuries, these lakes became unique environments where organisms adapted to salinity levels different from the surrounding sea, creating rare evolutionary niches. Forest floors on these islands often conceal layers of charcoal from ancient lightning-induced fires, helping scientists determine how often natural fires shaped vegetation cycles before human arrival. In some remote archipelagos, bird species evolved without predators, leading to flightless forms that nest on the ground and develop unique feeding habits, providing insight into the fragility of isolated ecosystems when exposed to sudden environmental change. These birds often forage on fruits from trees with thick, waxy rinds that evolved to protect seeds from humidity and insects, illustrating coevolution over long periods.
In the caves of certain islands, researchers discover ancient guano deposits containing layers of insect remains that track population cycles extending back thousands of years, offering a rare chronological record of atmospheric conditions because insect abundance often correlates with temperature and rainfall. Offshore, seagrass meadows hold sediments rich in microfossils that reveal how currents shifted through various climate phases, as well as how storms redistributed nutrients across shallow basins. On some forgotten islands, archaeologists uncover stone circles or aligned rock formations suggesting early navigators used these landmarks as astronomical guides, tracking solstices and seasonal star paths to move across vast ocean distances. Clay shards found near old shoreline settlements show that early inhabitants produced heat-resistant pottery shaped by local mineral composition, indicating that the island's geology directly influenced cultural development. Some island caves contain faint red or charcoal petroglyphs depicting constellations, migratory birds, or stylized waves, revealing how ancient communities interpreted their surroundings through symbolic representation. Bones discovered in certain rock shelters show evidence of ancient feasts involving fish species now extinct or rare in the region, providing insight into how marine ecosystems changed due to ocean temperature shifts or overfishing by early societies. In the tidal zones of forgotten islands, researchers find stone fish traps built centuries ago still intact beneath layers of barnacles and seaweed, illustrating how early civilizations adapted to tidal rhythms for sustainable harvesting. Shipwreck fragments occasionally discovered in offshore reefs tell stories of early explorers who encountered these islands, with wooden beams preserved by anoxic underwater conditions giving clues about shipbuilding techniques lost to time. Many islands with dense fog conditions create natural sound environments where wind and waves generate low-frequency tones that influence animal communication patterns. And observing how species adapt their calls to avoid acoustic overlap provides insight into how soundscapes shape behavior. Across all these forgotten islands, the interaction between isolation, geology, climate cycles, and biological adaptation creates long narratives written quietly into the land, offering endless data points that help reconstruct the past and imagine how the world's ecosystems evolve when left untouched for centuries.
Many forgotten islands preserve signs of ancient weather cycles etched into their landscapes, where cliff faces show alternating layers of compacted ash, silt, and coral fragments that reveal centuries of storms, volcanic eruptions, and calm periods, allowing researchers to reconstruct patterns of climatic shifts long before written history existed. These island cliffs act like memory walls, storing evidence of how the Earth breathed across millennia. In places where wind dominates, dunes migrate slowly across abandoned shores, each grain of sand shaped by patterns of humidity and heat, and these dunes move in predictable rhythms that keep a geological timeline of seasonal airflow, capturing how prevailing winds evolved as global temperatures changed. Some islands contain rock formations arranged in natural terraces created by repeated ocean transgressions, where waves advanced and retreated over thousands of years, carving stair-like features that help scientists identify historical sea level highs and lows, providing insight into how coastal systems responded to warming and cooling periods. Beneath the forests of certain remote islands lie ancient fault lines marked by subtle shifts in soil density, revealing episodes of seismic activity that occurred long before modern monitoring existed. These hidden fractures serve as indicators of tectonic stress and allow geologists to trace the island's long journey across shifting plates. On volcanic islands, mineral-rich crusts found on boulders record chemical signatures from eruptions that took place thousands of years ago, offering clues about how volcanic gases influenced atmospheric composition and regional climate. In regions where freshwater lakes occupy old impact craters, sediments at the lake bottom hold microscopic remains of algae and pollen, layering year after year to create a biological record of flowering cycles, forest expansion, and shifts in rainfall, enabling the reconstruction of ecological behavior across vast time spans.
Some islands host ancient mangrove systems whose twisted roots stretch deep into brackish water, trapping sediments that document centuries of tidal patterns and nutrient flows, showing how coastlines evolved under the combined influence of storms and sea level changes. In the highlands of certain isolated places, patches of alpine vegetation grow in small pockets protected from wind, preserving species that once thrived under cooler global conditions, making these microhabitats living relics of past climate phases. Cave systems on forgotten islands contain stalagmites and stalactites whose layered growth records changes in rainfall, humidity, and mineral content over time, functioning like stone calendars that reveal oscillations between wet and dry eras. Along riverbeds, smooth stones carry the imprint of ancient floods that shaped the island's interior, with rounded surfaces indicating periods of intense rainfall that carved valleys now silent and overgrown. Some islands preserve ancient lava flows whose cooling patterns indicate atmospheric temperature at the time of solidification, helping scientists determine whether the surrounding environment was warm, humid, or dry. In pea bogs located in hidden valleys, layers of partially decomposed plant matter capture trapped air bubbles that hold faint traces of ancient atmosphere, providing rare opportunities to study how greenhouse gases fluctuated naturally long before industrial activity. The presence of buried coral skeletons inland shows how catastrophic events like tsunamis transported marine life far from the coast, leaving sudden geological deposits that mark moments of extreme ocean behavior. In some remote archipelagos, researchers find distinct lines of white shells running along hillsides, created by old storm surges that lifted large quantities of shells onto land, forming natural ridges that represent long-term storm intensity patterns. Across certain islands, abandoned terraces built by ancient communities reveal how past populations adapted agriculture to variable rainfall, showing evidence of drought-resistant farming methods and carefully engineered water channels that redirected seasonal flows into reservoirs. Stone-lined pathways covered by moss indicate old travel routes connecting settlements to fresh water sources that shifted location as rainfall patterns changed, showing how societies reorganized themselves in response to environmental conditions. The remnants of ancient wells, now dry and filled with sediment, hold clues to groundwater levels that once sustained entire island populations, giving researchers insight into hydrological cycles and the sustainability of past communities. Some forgotten islands preserve remnants of wooden structures whose grain patterns reveal long-term humidity fluctuations because wood fibers expand or contract with moisture, storing a physical record of seasonal weather. Tree rings on ancient island trees offer one of the most precise natural archives of past climate, with each ring showing whether a particular year was wet, dry, warm, or cool, providing a detailed sequence of environmental shifts. In certain regions, volcanic ash trapped in ice pockets found in shaded mountain crevices preserves chemical markers that help identify the dates of distant eruptions, linking island data to global geological events. On deserted beaches, the distribution of driftwood reveals typical patterns of ocean currents that carried pieces from distant continents, showing how current routes shifted due to climatic or tectonic activity. On volcanic islands, fossilized shells embedded in uplifted coral platforms reveal historical pH levels of the ocean, showing how marine acidity changed over time and how it impacted shell-forming organisms. Embedded pollen grains in mud layers found in sheltered coves show how vegetation changed with temperature swings, illustrating the expansion and contraction of forests as different climate phases passed. Some islands show evidence of historical megadroughts, where layers of dried lakebed cracked into geometric patterns that hardened over centuries, preserving the shape of ancient drought conditions. In the caves of limestone islands, feather deposits from migratory birds accumulate in thin layers, serving as natural records of migration patterns influenced by temperature changes across hemispheres. Beneath old cliff overhangs, researchers find soot layers from ancient hearths, which reveal not only human presence, but also the types of wood burned, allowing reconstructions of which plant species were abundant during different climate eras. Even the bones of long-extinct island species reveal environmental clues because bone chemistry reflects diet and water sources, storing information about past ecosystems. Across all these islands, the combination of geological formations, biological remnants, and archaeological traces allows for an unusually clear window into Earth's past, showing how ancient climates shaped landscapes, guided species evolution, and influenced human settlement patterns, turning each forgotten island into a quiet chronicle of the world's long and intricate environmental story.
Across the remote edges of the Pacific, patterns in ancient island settlement continue to reveal how humans read the ocean as if it were a living map, and one forgotten chain of reefs shows how knowledge once moved through memory rather than written charts, carrying navigators between specks of land separated by hundreds of empty miles. On an unnamed coral rise west of the Marshalls, archaeologists found stone platforms arranged like spokes of a wheel, their alignment matching star paths used in non-instrument navigation, suggesting the island was not a permanent home but a celestial checkpoint, a place sailors visited only long enough to observe the horizon, feel the swell language beneath their canoes, and correct their bearings before disappearing again into the open water. Around each platform, they discovered fragments of shells polished unusually smooth, which researchers believe were handled repeatedly during ritual teachings, their surfaces shaped by generations of fingers passing them from teacher to apprentice as mnemonic objects in a maritime classroom without walls. A little farther south, on a volcanic island reduced now to 2 crescents of rock, evidence of early breadfruit cultivation shows how voyagers introduced staple trees as gifts to future travelers, planting food they would never personally harvest, but trusting that someone following the same route decades later might rely on those fruits in an hour of fatigue or storm damage. The idea that unknown predecessors planted shade and nourishment for strangers they would never meet makes these islands feel like a chain of kindness stretched across time. And the more the soil is studied, the more it becomes clear that these forgotten places carried the fingerprints of many cultures, each leaving behind subtle forms of hospitality. On a windswept ridge in the Kuril Islands, an excavation uncovered a semicircle of whale bones arranged like the ribs of a collapsed cathedral. The open space at the center filled with obsidian flakes suggesting ritual gatherings or shared tool-making seasons. The positioning of the bones implies that the community used the shape as a windbreak, perhaps centering their stories inside the natural amphitheater created by the curvature of the giant ribs. Some researchers propose that echoing inside that cavity was part of the ceremonial experience, as the sound bounced between bone and cliff, turning voices into softened vibrations that may have been interpreted as responses from ancestral spirits. The Kurils, remote and rarely studied, also carry deposits of ash from dozens of eruptions, preserving footprints and pottery shards in a layered timeline. One such layer revealed the print of a child's foot beside the paw of a dog, both preserved in volcanic silt, the pair likely walking moments before the eruption reshaped the island. No structure survived, but the preserved step captures a moment of everyday life, an ordinary walk interrupted by the extraordinary force of nature, an echo of a world that would otherwise be lost. Far to the southwest, the island of Makatea rises like a fossilized memory, its cliffs formed from ancient coral that tectonic forces lifted hundreds of feet above present sea level. The island's interior caves contain the remains of extinct birds, some with beaks specialized for flowers that no longer exist, evidence of ecosystems trapped in stone like pages of an unfinished book. Water dripping through the limestone carries minerals that seal these bones in shimmering layers, and in some chambers, early inhabitants carved simple geometric lines into the walls, possibly as territorial markers or symbolic maps pointing toward freshwater sources. Outside the caves, the terrain is jagged, and paths etched into the rock show how people learned to navigate the sharp landscape by following routes that aligned with sunrise or the seasonal return of certain seabirds. On the southern edge, a circular depression appears to have been a freshwater lens where early settlers collected drinking water, its outline still visible even though it dried centuries ago.
The island's isolation meant that cultural practices survived here long after disappearing elsewhere, including traditional stone lifting rituals once performed as proof of strength before navigation journeys, each stone bearing the faint indentations of hands that carried them. Moving back toward the Indian Ocean, a nearly ignored atoll known as North Brother hides an ecological paradox. Despite its small size, it is home to one of the densest seabird populations in the region, and guano layers several meters deep preserve seeds brought unintentionally by birds traveling from distant continents. Among these layers, researchers found traces of plants not currently known on the island, suggesting past vegetation cycles far more diverse than today's sparse shrubs. This implies that small islands change continually, shaped by storms, ocean currents, bird migrations, and even brief human visits. Scattered across the island's perimeter lie stone arrangements that don't match the styles of nearby cultures, raising speculation that a lost seafaring group may have used the island as a temporary observatory or rest point. Some stones form V-shaped structures pointing toward the monsoon sunrise, and others form partial rings that might have supported simple shelters. Even without confirmed cultural ties, the physical traces reinforce how islands often acted as punctuation marks in vast ocean journeys, short pauses in otherwise uninterrupted silence. In the South Atlantic, the lonely outpost of Inaccessible Island remains one of the most untouched places on Earth, reachable only with great difficulty due to rough seas and towering cliffs. Its plateau holds grasses and mosses that have remained genetically isolated from mainland relatives for millions of years, creating a tiny museum of ancient plant lineages. The island also shelters unique bird species, including the inaccessible island rail, the world's smallest flightless bird. Its existence raises questions about how its ancestors arrived, possibly blown off course by storms, landing on a cliff edge, surviving by chance, and eventually evolving into a form perfectly suited for an island without predators. Fossils found in crevices suggest the island once hosted a now vanished giant petrel species, possibly driven away by climatic shifts. Because humans rarely step here, the island functions as a time capsule, preserving how ecosystems thrive when left entirely alone. Meanwhile, in the Arctic's Beaufort Sea, a tiny gravel island called Karluk rises only a few centimeters above high tide, yet holds wooden artifacts from nomadic groups who once crossed the frozen sea during winter migrations. The artifacts include sled fragments, fishing tools, and carved driftwood figurines that may have served as teaching aids or protective charms. The most mysterious object is a flat wooden disc with grooves radiating from its center, interpreted by some as a primitive wind direction indicator. The island's ephemeral nature, sometimes flooded, sometimes present, makes it an unpredictable landmark, yet ancient travelers clearly relied on it. Today, as permafrost thaws and sea level shifts, the island continues to shrink, threatening the remaining artifacts with eventual submersion. Preservation teams race to document the site before it disappears entirely, highlighting the fragile balance between memory and the relentless forces that erase it. Across all of these remote places, a shared quietness exists, a sense that history here is not told through monumental ruins, but through subtle layers, shards, footprints, carved lines, bones, seeds carried by birds, and the faint geometry of stones arranged with purpose. These islands resist noise, offering clues only to those willing to observe slowly, to sit in the wind long enough to sense how humans once moved across the planet, guided by stars, tides, and instinct rather than certainty. Each forgotten island becomes a reminder that small places often hold the most delicate threads of our past, threads that require patience to see and imagination, and that these isolated corners of the world are not empty. They are quiet archives still whispering through their landscapes.
Across the distant arcs of Earth's lesser-known archipelagos, researchers continue uncovering layers of environmental memory that reveal how isolation transforms both ecosystems and human behavior. And one of the most intriguing examples lies on a chain of basaltic islands deep in the southern Indian Ocean, where abandoned stone fish traps have remained functional for centuries, capturing tidal rhythms in their curved designs.
These traps, built by early navigators, relied on reading water movement rather than enforcing it, creating crescent-shaped enclosures that filled at high tide and drained gently at low tide, leaving behind fish that could be collected without boats or nets. Their durability shows that technology on forgotten islands often emerged not from complex machinery, but from close observation. And the placement of these traps, always aligned with a specific angle of the incoming swell, demonstrates how knowledge of currents shaped settlement patterns. Inland, layers of peat retain pollen grains from long-extinct shrubs, suggesting that the islands were once greener and supported a more diverse set of food sources, which may explain why early travelers stopped here repeatedly even though the islands offered little in the way of shelter. Fossils of small flightless birds found in the upland hollows indicate that these animals disappeared soon after the arrival of seafaring people, another reminder of how fragile isolated ecosystems can be when confronted with new predators or subtle changes in climate. Along the coastal cliffs, narrow trails carved into the rock remain visible, worn by generations walking the same route between freshwater pools and the higher ground where winds carried signals from approaching storms, functioning as a natural early warning system long before instruments existed. Far into the Pacific, a remote limestone island reveals a different kind of human footprint. Deep inside labyrinthine caverns, early inhabitants carved shallow bowls into the stone floor to collect dripping water, creating natural reservoirs protected from evaporation. These bowls, spaced at precise intervals, form a path that leads researchers to believe the cave system doubled as a ceremonial route, each stop representing a point in a cosmological story that tied the underground to the sky. Charcoal remnants from torches used thousands of years ago still cling to the ceiling, and the soot lines show how smoke once spiraled upward through cracks, venting into unseen chambers. Outside the caves, terraces carved into the hillsides held taro and palm plantings, enabling families to farm even on rugged terrain. Seeds preserved in clay pots show that these early settlers attempted to introduce new crops like breadfruit and pandanus, but only some survived the island's unpredictable rainfall and thin soil. On the eastern slope, archaeologists found carefully stacked stones forming a small wall that seems defensive at first, but actually appears to be a boundary marker, possibly dividing family spaces or indicating a safe navigation route inland when cyclones approached. In several places, natural sinkholes reveal ancient animal bones arranged in unusual patterns, suggesting ritual deposits or perhaps seasonal gatherings that honored the spirits thought to inhabit the island's subterranean chambers. Meanwhile, in the Caribbean region, a nearly untouched cay holds circular hearths filled with burned coral fragments rather than wood ash, indicating that early visitors used coral as a heat-retaining material when vegetation was scarce. This technique allowed them to boil water or cook fish using minimal fuel, highlighting how island innovation arises from necessity. Nearby, a cluster of pottery shards shows designs that differ from known regional styles, suggesting that travelers from multiple cultures interacted here, exchanging stories, tools, and survival techniques. Some shards carry a fine red slip that likely came from mainland sources, meaning the cay served as a midway exchange point rather than a full settlement. On the western shore, a sandbar extends far into the water, and beneath it lies a line of sharpened stakes dated to several hundred years ago, possibly used to trap turtles during their nesting migrations. The stakes, now water-worn and encrusted with barnacles, offer a glimpse into sustainable harvesting practices, temporary structures that caught only a limited number of animals and were periodically rebuilt as the sand shifted. To the far north, a tundra-coated island in the Bering Sea presents another puzzle. The island's surface is dotted with shallow depressions that fill with meltwater each summer, turning the land into a mosaic of reflective pools that attract migratory birds from distant continents. Beneath the tundra, researchers discovered a layer of ancient driftwood that predates human occupation, showing how ocean currents delivered wood to treeless islands long before anyone arrived. Later, early Arctic peoples used this driftwood to craft sled runners, bow staffs, and tent supports, meaning the island served as both a fuel depot and a workshop. Along the coastline, stone rings mark the sites of temporary dwellings, their outlines still intact despite centuries of wind. Each ring contains fragments of bone tools used for fishing through sea ice, including barbed points made from walrus ivory. In the center of one ring, a polished stone with concentric circles carved into it was found, possibly representing wind patterns or the cyclical passage of seasons. Scientists also discovered strands of woven grass rope preserved in permafrost, showing how local materials were adapted for utility in a place where resources were scarce. In the South Pacific again, a forgotten atoll holds remnants of raised pathways that run in perfectly straight lines across sections of shallow lagoon, crafted by piling coral blocks in knee-deep water. These paths connect small islets and would have allowed early inhabitants to move around even during high tide, turning the lagoon into a navigable highway. The structure of the paths suggests a coordinated community effort, perhaps involving hundreds of people moving coral one piece at a time. Along several of these paths lie coral pillars that may have functioned as markers for night travel, possibly catching moonlight or phosphorescent algae. The atoll's interior basin holds brackish water filled with tiny shrimp species found nowhere else, creatures that evolved in total isolation and survived changes in sea level that transformed the basin repeatedly over thousands of years. On one of the larger islets, sediment layers contain coconut husks mixed with ash, clear signs of early feasting events. Some husks appear deliberately cut rather than cracked open naturally, and their positioning suggests communal gatherings focused on storytelling or ritual sharing of food. Even smaller, more fragile islands hold equally meaningful clues. One sand island off the coast of Madagascar disappears and reappears depending on the season, yet archaeologists found tiny obsidian flakes embedded in its shallow soil, implying that ancient sailors used the island as a sharpening stop for blades before continuing long voyages. The flakes are so small that they were likely produced during brief maintenance work rather than large tool-making operations. This reinforces the idea that even islands too small to support life still contributed essential functions to regional travel networks. Shell middens on the same island contain species that no longer live there, signaling shifts in sea temperature and current patterns. These changes transformed the island's ecology multiple times, and the archaeological layers show alternating periods of human visitation and absence following cycles of rich marine life and scarcity. All these islands, whether volcanic, coral, tundra-covered, or shifting with the tides, demonstrate how human movement across the world relied not on grand settlements, but on countless small stops, each offering water, food, rest, or simple reassurance that others had passed the same way before. They show that forgotten places often served as bridges between worlds, carrying fragile strands of culture, knowledge, and survival across vast oceans.
Across several remote islands spread across the southern arc of the Pacific, researchers continue to discover unusual layers of environmental and cultural evidence, suggesting that isolation did more than shape human behavior. It shaped entire mythologies, survival strategies, and ecological relationships that did not exist anywhere else. On one of these basalt-rimmed islands, narrow channels carved through ancient lava serve as natural tidal gauges, capturing the rise and fall of the sea with remarkable precision. And early inhabitants positioned their shelters near these channels so they could monitor changes that signaled storms weeks before they arrived. The channels amplify distant wave patterns, creating low, resonant tones as water moves through them. And this sound may have been interpreted as the voice of a guardian spirit, causing families to gather during windswept nights, listening to the rumble that echoed inside their sleeping chambers. Inland, terraces cut into cliffsides contain remnants of breadfruit orchards arranged in circular formations, suggesting rituals related to planting seasons. And each terrace layer holds microfossil evidence that early farmers intentionally rotated crops to keep the soil healthy despite thin volcanic earth. A small rock shelter reveals soot traces from torches crafted with resin that doesn't naturally occur on the island, meaning early navigators traded for materials or carried them from great distances. The shelter's central stone platform is decorated with faint engravings of spirals and zigzags, possibly representing ocean swells or prevailing winds.
and the careful placement of these symbols indicate they were instructional rather than purely artistic, teaching new generations about navigation, star alignments, and tidal behavior. Far to the west, a forgotten island ringed with steep limestone cliffs holds a long, narrow valley that traps warm air, creating a microclimate where plants not found elsewhere in the region continue to survive. Seeds preserved in this sheltered basin reveal species more commonly associated with islands thousands of kilometers away, suggesting ancient voyagers accidentally introduced them during ceremonial exchanges or intentional migrations. Beneath the valley floor, sinkholes lead to a network of underground chambers filled with fresh water, and ceramic fragments found near these openings show that families lowered containers to collect the cool water during dry seasons. These ceramics differ greatly from coastal pottery, indicating that inland communities developed their own distinctive styles. Scattered pieces of obsidian nearby suggest tool sharpening stations, showing that even an isolated valley played a role in broader island networks. On the highest ridge, archaeologists found smooth depressions in the rock created by generations of people grinding medicinal plants to treat injuries, snake bites, and fever, implying that the island once supported a complex healing tradition, possibly tied to the microclimate's rare vegetation. The ridge also offers an unobstructed view of distant reefs, and oral histories from nearby island groups mention a place where old navigators trained by observing how clouds formed over underwater mountains. This island's cliffs perfectly match those accounts, showing how small landforms served as training grounds for long-distance voyagers. In the far north, a frost-touched island in the Arctic region presents a different kind of isolation story. Thick peat deposits hold evidence of migratory cycles older than human occupation, and when early groups finally reached this island, they adapted to its conditions with remarkable speed. Caribou bones arranged in deliberate patterns suggest hunting strategies designed to over-harvesting herds, and these patterns resemble those used by mainland communities, meaning that knowledge traveled even when people lived far apart. On the island's western slope, a ring of stones marks the remains of a shelter partially insulated with snow blocks during winter. In the center of this ring, archaeologists found a carved ivory figure with elongated limbs and swirling patterns on its torso, likely representing wind spirits or seasonal forces. The figure's style resembles carvings found thousands of kilometers away, indicating shared cultural ancestry. Along the northern cliffs, narrow paths cut by ancient footsteps lead to fishing spots where holes in the sea ice remain usable year after year, and preserved fish bones reveal they targeted species that migrate beneath the ice in winter. Driftwood from faraway continents lies scattered along the shore, showing how currents served as supply chains in places without trees, and early inhabitants used this wood to build sleds, spear shafts, and frames for windbreaks. Moving into the equatorial region, a chain of coral islands reveals terraces built with astonishing precision, each stone placed without mortar yet interlocking so well that the structures withstand cyclones and shifting tides. These terraces once held community gathering spaces where oral histories were recited under moonlight, and fragments of shell trumpets suggest that music accompanied these recitations. Patterns cut into coral pillars show how early navigators tracked lunar cycles, and some pillars align perfectly with solstice sunrises. At the center of the largest island, a circular stone platform contains ash layers mixed with seeds of pandanus and coconut, indicating ceremonial feasting events that likely marked seasonal transitions. Nearby, an abandoned well lined with fine coral sand reveals how early engineers filtered brackish water into a drinkable form, maintaining hydration even during droughts. On the island's southeastern beach, a series of stone enclosures once housed turtles captured during nesting migrations, but unlike regions where turtle hunting decimated populations, the enclosures suggest a controlled method that allowed most turtles to return to the sea after eggs were collected. This sustainable approach reflects a deep understanding of ecological balance, showing how island communities survived by respecting natural cycles. On a remote Atlantic island formed from ancient volcanic eruptions, wind-scoured cliffs hide caves filled with faint charcoal drawings depicting boats with high prows, birds with elongated wings, and swirling shapes resembling whirlpools. These drawings may illustrate legends of dangerous currents offshore, warning sailors of hidden reefs. A collapsed stone wall near the coast marks a former lookout tower, and inside the rubble, researchers found fragments of polished basalt tools, likely used to shape wooden canoes. The island's soil contains iron-rich minerals that stain pottery red, giving local ceramics a distinct coloration seen nowhere else. And pieces of these vessels appear on other islands, meaning they served as trade goods exchanged across hundreds of kilometers. Inland, a circular arrangement of tall stones may have been a skywatching site. Holes carved in several stones align with star clusters that guided navigation. Bones of seabirds show that feathers from certain species were prized for ritual headdresses or symbolic objects. Collectively, all these islands reveal that forgotten places once formed vast interconnected networks, each contributing knowledge, resources, or cultural memory to travelers who pass through. Though isolated by modern standards, they served as stepping stones across oceans, supporting human movement, survival, creativity, and a sense of belonging that stretched far beyond any single shore.
The night settles more deeply as the path through the forgotten islands begins to dissolve into something softer, something quieter, something that feels less like a journey across the world and more like a slow drifting through memory itself. The final stretch of this wandering passes through a place where the edges between land, sky, and dream blur gently, where the landscapes seem to exhale in long, unbroken breaths. Here, the islands no longer appear as individual shapes, but as overlapping silhouettes of every silent place you visited tonight, gathering into a single coastline stitched together by moonlight and slow-moving waves. You continue along this quiet shoreline, noticing how the sand feels neither cold nor warm, but perfectly balanced, like it has been untouched for centuries. Driftwood lies scattered in delicate arrangements, smoothed by time until it resembles the bones of ancient ships. Small pools of tidewater glimmer with faint reflections of the stars, and each one seems to carry traces of the stories left behind by islands now lost, sunk, or forgotten by every map. The air moves slowly, as if it has learned patience from the ocean. The gentle hush of waves rolls in and out, carrying the soft rhythm of a world that has existed long before you and will continue long after, unchanged by urgency. Far along the shore stands a quiet stone path leading upward, carved into the side of a small cliff. Moss grows in the cracks, glowing faintly under the night sky, and the steps feel worn in a way that suggests generations once walked them, not to reach a destination, but simply to watch the horizon. At the top, you find an old lighthouse that hasn't been lit in decades. Its windows are fogged from the inside, and the door gently shifts with the breeze. When you step inside, you find the interior still holding the faint scent of salt, wood, and old paper. A rusted lantern sits on a table beside a map drawn in careful strokes, showing islands that no longer exist, their outlines fading into patches of blank parchment. A small journal rests beside it, open to a page where someone once described the color of the ocean here as the shade of sleep. The room is silent, but not empty. It holds the presence of every person who ever kept watch over the horizon from this lonely tower. You step back out into the night, and the sky has grown even clearer, revealing constellations mirrored in the water below. The stars seem closer than before, their reflections trembling lightly with the movement of the sea. You walk down the path again until the sand meets your feet and the world feels open in all directions at once. The ocean breathes steadily, and it feels as though the entire planet is exhaling with you. In this final stretch, the islands gather into a soft, wordless memory, one that isn't meant to be analyzed or solved, but gently held. Their loneliness becomes peaceful. Their silence becomes a form of comfort.
Their forgotten stories become part of the calm settling through your body. You move farther down the beach, following a long curve until you reach a place where the trees lean slightly toward the water, their leaves whispering in long, continuous sighs. Fireflies drift between them in slow spirals, their light barely brighter than starlight, giving the forest a dreamlike glow. Beneath one of the trees stands an old stone arch covered in vines. It doesn't lead anywhere, yet stepping through it feels like passing into a softer state of mind, as if the world beyond the arch breathes more slowly, speaks more quietly, and waits more patiently. You continue walking along the path until the trees thin out and open into a clearing where the sand turns silver under the moon. A gentle breeze comes from inland, carrying scents of wet earth and distant rain. This is the place where the forgotten islands gather into a single memory. You settle onto the sand, letting your hands sink into its cool surface. In the quiet, the world feels suspended, not asleep, not awake, but resting. The waves move in long, slow strokes, washing away everything sharp or heavy inside you. The breathing of the sea blends with your own, and everything seems to fall into rhythm. Here, at the edge of the journey, nothing demands attention. Nothing asks for effort. Nothing requires direction. The island simply exists around you, holding you with its calm presence. The tide pulls back, revealing faint lines of shells and stones shaped by years of patient motion. Each one feels like an echo of the places you've been tonight. The frozen edges, the coral mysteries, the desert wind hollows, the myth-born islands, the vanished civilizations. All those fragments gather like gentle whispers along this final shore. And as you sit there, listening to the quiet, the entire journey begins to fold into a single lull, steady and comforting, like a heartbeat slowed by deep rest. Now the island seems to breathe out, the air expanding softly as though giving you space to settle deeper. The stars drift slightly along the water's surface, stretching into long lines of silver. The horizon dims into a deep blue, the kind that signals not an ending, but a soft transition into sleep. And in this final moment, let the quiet hold you. Let the world around you soften. Let the drift pull you deeper. You've walked through forgotten shores, crossed silent forests, climbed abandoned towers, and listened to the oldest winds on earth. All of it settles now into calmness. And if your eyes feel heavier, let them close. If your breath slows, let it. If your thoughts begin to fade, let them drift like small boats into the dark, gentle sea. You're safe here. You're resting. You're allowed to let go. Thank you for being here, for staying through this quiet journey, for giving your mind a place to settle. Whenever you feel ready, you can drift into sleep or just stay here with the sound of the calm. Good night, and may the forgotten places stay soft around you.